In the Sword Marquis Mansion, Bahui Commandery, Tianyan Province, Tianzong Dynasty, ***. The soft hum of steel slicing through the air echoed in the courtyard. Menge, your sword can be faster and more precise, came the calm voice of a young boy dressed in black. His eyes, sharp and focused, watched every movement of the girl before him. Jian Menge, a stunningly beautiful young girl clad in snow-white robes, moved fluidly, her sword a blur as she practiced. She executed each strike with remarkable precision, sweat glistening on her brow under the late afternoon sun. The boy observing her was Jian Wushuang, his demeanor steady and composed despite their youth. Both appeared no older than 15 or 16, but Jian Wushuang's perceptive gaze and keen advice betrayed a maturity far beyond his years. As Jian Menge completed the sequence of strikes, she sheathed her sword with a smooth motion and approached him, a confident smile gracing her lips. "Brother Wushuang, how was that?" she asked. "The Aurora sword art is all about speed. To master it at the profound level, one must complete the entire sequence within 40 breaths. You just did it in 38. "That's impressive," Jian Wushuang replied with a small nod of approval. Jian Menge's face lit up. "It's all thanks to your guidance. Without you, I wouldn't have reached this level in just 2 months. Jian Wushuang shook his head slightly, a wry smile playing at his lips. "You give me too much credit. Your talent in swordsmanship is extraordinary. Apart from myself, I doubt anyone in the Sword Marquis Mansion can match your potential." Her cheeks flushed with a faint hint of pride. "Still, I can't imagine anyone finishing the sequence in under 30 breaths. Surely not even you?" Jian Wushuang smiled enigmatically, his eyes betraying no secrets. In truth, he could execute the Aurora sword art in just 23 breaths, a feat far surpassing the profound level. But he said nothing, merely letting the silence stretch between them. "Brother Wushuang, with your talent, I'm sure you can do it." "Unless," Jian Menge hesitated, her expression clouding with sorrow. Jian Wushuang's smile faltered briefly, understanding the implication behind her words. "Don't worry. Soon, I'll become a warrior." "Really?" she asked, her tone laced with doubt. He had made the same promise 4 years ago, and still, he remained unable to cultivate spiritual power. Jian Wushuang's lineage marked him as someone destined for greatness. As the son of the Sword Pavilion Master, he had grown up revered as a prodigy, a beacon of hope for the Sword Marquis Mansion's future. But fate had been cruel. 4 years ago, his father vanished during a journey, leaving behind silence and uncertainty. To make matters worse, when Jian Wushuang reached the age to begin cultivating spiritual power, the foundation of any warrior, he discovered he was incapable of doing so. Without spiritual power, he was deemed a failure. In a place like the Sword Marquis Mansion, where strength was paramount, his inability to cultivate rendered him an outcast, a laughingstock. Yet despite his struggles, Jian Wushuang refused to give up. His extraordinary talent in swordsmanship became his solace, though it meant little without the ability to channel spiritual energy. "It's different this time," he said confidently, looking at Menge. Her smile was faint, almost dismissive. "I hope you're right, Brother Wushuang." Just then, a kindly middle-aged man entered the courtyard. Jian Menge turned, her expression brightening. "Father." "Uncle Lan," Jian Wushuang greeted. Jian Lan, the great elder of the Red Martial Hall, acknowledged them with a warm smile. "Wushuang, you've spent the whole day helping Menge refine her skills. That's admirable." "It's nothing," Jian Wushuang replied, bowing his head slightly. "It's getting late. I'll take my leave." Jian Lan watched him go, his kindly expression fading into something sharper as he turned to his daughter. "Menge, how is your progress?" "I've mastered the Aurora sword art to the profound level," she answered, her tone serious. "Excellent." A predatory smile spread across Jian Lan's face. "For 4 years, you've stayed close to that boy, enduring his presence to learn his techniques. Now, with all the 18 first-class sword arts mastered to the profound level, it's time to set our plan in motion." Menge's eyes turned cold, a glint of ruthlessness flashing within them. "Are you certain this will work?" "Great endeavors require great sacrifices," Jian Lan said, his voice low and resolute. "Everything depends on tomorrow." Back in his courtyard, Jian Wushuang ate a simple meal before sitting cross-legged on his bed. He smiled bitterly, reflecting on Menge's disbelief. "She doesn't know the truth," he murmured, his hand drifting to his abdomen. There, nestled within his body, was the source of his troubles, a mysterious gray stone bead. It had been with him since birth, a silent parasite devouring the spiritual energy he absorbed from nature before it could transform into power. To others, he appeared incapable of cultivation. But in truth, his 108 meridians were fully unblocked, ready to channel spiritual power if not for the bead's interference. For 4 years, Jian Wushuang had poured every ounce of spirit he could gather into the bead, hoping to fill it to its limit. And now he felt it, an imminent change. The bead was nearing saturation. As he began his nightly cultivation, the bead suddenly trembled. It spun faster and faster, shrinking rapidly until it disappeared altogether. "It's gone," Jian Wushuang whispered, elation lighting his face. But before he could fully comprehend the bead's absence, a flood of information surged into his mind. Heavenly creation skill. Words etched in his consciousness with radiant clarity, form a supreme martial art with the technique of creation from heaven and earth. His journey was just beginning. Form a supreme martial art with the technique of creation from heaven and earth. Jian Wushuang's eyes snapped open, filled with astonishment. A cultivation method? Another cultivation method appearing in my mind, he murmured, startled at first, but he quickly connected it to the mysterious gray stone bead. In the Sword Marquee Mansion, disciples who managed to condense spiritual power could select appropriate cultivation methods from the Cultivation Pavilion. Yet, in all his years, Jian Wushuang had never encountered or even heard of a cultivation method as audacious as the heavenly creation skill. Its name alone suggested it stood apart, claiming mastery over the heavens and the earth. The gray stone bead absorbed all my spiritual energy for 4 years. It vanishes now, leaving behind this cultivation method? This must be extraordinary. He delved into the contents of the skill immediately. The path of martial arts is a defiance of fate, a pursuit of creation through the power of heaven and earth. The heavenly creation skill consists of multiple realms, including the 9 heavens of the divine path, the ultimate spiritual sea, the supreme gold core realm, yin-yang breaking, venerable master, flying to the 9th heaven and beyond. Each realm challenges the heavens and defies convention. A practitioner of this method is a defiant cultivator. Jian Wushuang froze as he absorbed the words. Cultivation in defiance of the heavens? A defiant cultivator. He drew a deep breath, working to steady himself. Despite the brief introduction, the weight of the skill's implications was staggering. Most warriors followed the standard way of martial arts, beginning with the spirit path, advancing through the 7 steps, forming a spiritual sea, and culminating in the legendary realm of divine transcendence. But the heavenly creation skill upended this progression entirely. Where the spirit path had 7 levels, the divine path had 9, more profound, more arduous, and utterly unconventional. It wasn't merely a different approach, it was a rebellion against the natural order. Jian Wushuang's emotions roiled, a mixture of shock, fear, and growing excitement. A heaven-defying cultivation method hidden within me all this time? He clenched his fists. What should I do? Do I dare cultivate it? Yet, the answer came swiftly. What's wrong with defying the heavens, he thought, his determination solidifying. The way of martial arts is inherently a battle against fate. If the heavens stand in my way, then I'll defy them. After 4 years of torment, this method is my recompense. I won't waste it. His hesitation evaporated, replaced by resolve. Sitting cross-legged, he began following the instructions of the heavenly creation skill. Spiritual energy surged into his body from the surrounding heavens and earth, flowing wildly into his 108 meridians. The energy coursed along a unique path before coalescing in his dantian. The process was unlike anything he had experienced, and his body resonated with the power of creation. The night passed in a blur. Before dawn, Jian Wushuang slowly opened his eyes. He gazed at his right palm, where a faint glow of spiritual power flickered. His eyes shone with exhilaration. The first heaven of the divine path. After a single night of cultivation, not only had he condensed spiritual power for the first time, but his dantian now brimmed with energy. He had become a true warrior. The heavenly creation skill is incredible. In just one night, I've stored more spiritual power than others at this stage, and the strength I can wield far surpasses the first step of the spirit path. He tested his newfound power, feeling the sheer might coursing through him. If the first heaven of the divine path already outclasses the first step of the spirit path, does that mean when I reach the 9th heaven, I'll rival those in the spiritual sea realm? The potential is terrifying. Jian Wushuang marveled at the possibilities, his excitement tempered only by the daunting path ahead. Beyond the cultivation method itself, the skill introduced him to a secret technique, the soul-devouring secret skill. Its description alone made his blood run cold. A forbidden skill, he muttered. Devastating, but it comes at an immense cost. This isn't something I'll attempt now, not until I'm stronger. For now, it was enough to have become a warrior at last. The torment of the last 4 years was finally over. I, Jian Wushuang, am no longer trash. His heart thundered with exhilaration. With the heavenly creation skill, I'll surpass even my father. I'll become the strongest warrior in the Sword Marquee Mansion and claim the Sword Pavilion as my own. He washed quickly, eager to share the news with Jian Menge. He imagined her surprise and pride when she learned of his breakthrough. But as he stepped outside, voices reached him.
Have you heard?
Jian Lan, the great elder of the Red Martial Hall, just gathered the entire hall to make a bold demand to the mansion master.
What demand?
He's pushing to have his daughter, Jian Menge, nominated as the Sword Pavilion Master. Jian Wushuang froze mid-step, his mind reeling.
Hey everyone, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy the audiobooks, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. If you'd like to support us further, consider becoming a Patreon member. As a member, you'll gain the ability to request the next part of a novel audiobook I've uploaded, depending on your Patreon tier.
Is it true that Uncle Lan, in alliance with Red Martial Hall, asked the mansion master to have Menge become the Sword Pavilion Master so that she can take charge of Sword Pavilion?
Is it a joke?
Jian Wushuang laughed and didn't take it seriously. After all, for these 4 years, he stayed with Jian Menge almost every day, and Jian Lan had always been kind and taken particular care of him. As a result, they got along well with each other. Jian Wushuang even treated them like his family, keeping no secrets from them. His greatest wish, which was to take charge of the Sword Pavilion, had been known to them, both Jian Lan and Jian Menge. In addition, it had been a tradition that the Sword Pavilion Master could only be selected from the Sword Pavilion. And Jian Menge, like her father, was committed to Red Martial Hall. In Sword Marquee Mansion, Sword Pavilion and Red Martial Hall belonged to two different factions, which competed for dominance. Sword Marquee Mansion in its early days concentrated on intensive research in swordsmanship, which can be inferred from the surname, Jian, of each clansman. However, with its gradual prosperity and development, juniors of the Marquee Mansion also branched into other weapons. This was especially if they were more gifted in them than in swordsmanship. Later, there were more and more such juniors, eventually leading to the formation of Red Martial Hall. The existence of these two factions never led to open conflict, though there was always an undercurrent of rivalry. Now the relationship between them was especially acrimonious. Since Jian Menge, the daughter of the great elder of Red Martial Hall, was their heir, how could she take charge of Sword Pavilion? Jian Wushuang did not take it seriously at first, thinking that the man was just kidding. But he heard further news after he took just a few steps. I heard that too. Jian Lan, the head of Red Martial Hall, together with the alchemists of Pill Refining Room, went to the mansion master and requested that he approve Jian Menge to take charge of the Sword Pavilion. This was strongly opposed by Sword Pavilion. However, they have had little influence since Jian Nantian, the Sword Pavilion Master, disappeared. Their opposition was overruled. Finally, the mansion master, although reluctant, promised to have Jian Menge take charge of Sword Pavilion as long as she was qualified to be the Sword Pavilion Master. What standards needed to be satisfied to become the Sword Pavilion Master? In Sword Marquee Mansion, the Sword Pavilion Master is only inferior to the mansion master. They have a high status, which is difficult to reach. Therefore, Sword Pavilion has always insisted on a set of minimum requirements for its master. To be the Sword Pavilion Master, the very first requirement is to gain extremely high attainments in sword principles and be proficient in all 18 first-class sword arts of Sword Pavilion.
First-class sword arts? All 18 of them?
There were only exclamations that remained. In Sword Marquee Mansion, normal disciples only had access to third-class or second-class sword arts, while first-class sword arts were available for those talented disciples who were core members or elite members. Today in the Sword Pavilion, there were less than 10 disciples who were qualified to learn first-class sword arts, and even if possible, they could only learn 1 or 2 first-class sword arts at most. As for the 18 first-class sword arts, even a core disciple of Sword Pavilion was not eligible to learn all of them, let alone a disciple of Red Martial Hall. It is totally impossible for Jian Menge to satisfy this standard, someone said confidently. Not exactly, Jian Menge did it. Today, under the watchful eyes of the mansion master and Sword Pavilion elders, she carried out all 18 first-class sword arts, with an incredible display of proficiency at the profound level. Excuse me? How could it be possible? How did she learn these sword arts? Everyone present was shocked. Jian Wushuang, however, standing there the entire time, was dumbfounded. 18 first-class sword arts of Sword Pavilion? Was he not the person who had taught Jian Menge those techniques? 4 years ago, it was Jian Menge who helped him get out of his dilemma when his father was missing and he could not condense spiritual power, which was a huge blow to him. Having been grateful to her, he stayed with Jian Menge almost every day. She was endowed with great talent in sword principle and was keen on sword wielding. However, there were no advanced sword arts in Red Martial Hall. Seeing this, Jian Wushuang, an innocent kid then, at 12 or 13, started to teach Jian Menge swordsmanship. Later, he even taught her sword arts from Sword Pavilion.
4 years have passed.
In these 4 years, He taught each of the 18 first-class sword arts to Jian Menge. But today, due to his teaching, she could dream of taking charge of Sword Pavilion? To take charge of the Sword Pavilion was the greatest wish of his whole life.
No, it's impossible.
Menge would never do that. Jian Wushuang thought, shaking his head, reluctant to believe it. To take charge of Sword Pavilion required tremendous quality and strength, besides proficiency in all 18 first-class sword arts, which was compulsory. The minimum strength requirement for a Sword Pavilion master was the ability to battle with each of the 4 great elders of Sword Pavilion for at least 20 movements, which Jian Menge did successfully.
How could it be possible?
I am well aware of the strength of the 4 great elders of Sword Pavilion, who have already reached spiritual sea realm long ago. It is said that Elder Hong, the strongest among them, has reached the exceptional spiritual sea realm, just 1 step away from the gold core realm. How could Jian Menge ever be able to get through 20 movements? We have looked down upon her all this time. She has always been quiet in the Marquis's mansion and seldom showed her strength, but today, during her battles with the 4 Sword Pavilion elders, everyone present was totally shocked by her strength. It was at the spiritual sea realm. More than that, she is at the profound spiritual sea realm. With 1 more level, she would be at the exceptional spiritual sea realm.
Jian Menge?
How could she step into the profound spiritual sea realm? I don't think it's possible for such a young 16-year-old girl. Not only were those disciples who were having the discussion too astonished to utter a word, but Jian Wushuang was also totally dumbstruck.
Menge, she
reached the profound spiritual sea realm. Jian Wushuang thought with disbelief. Although he had been with Jian Menge every day for 4 years, she had never shown her strength. Jian Wushuang did not think much about that, thinking that Jian Menge was the same as other disciples in Marquis's mansion, who were at the 5th or 6th step of the spirit path at most. He never imagined she could reach spiritual sea realm, let alone the profound spiritual sea realm. How could a girl as young as 16 years old step into the profound spiritual sea realm? It had never happened in Sword Marquis Mansion over the last hundreds of years. Jian Menge, such a genius with super talent, has never appeared before in the hundreds of years of history of the Sword Marquis Mansion. She is so good at the 18 first-class sword arts of Sword Pavilion that she has survived 20 movements of the 4 great elders of Sword Pavilion. As a result, Mansion Master gave his instant consent to Jian Menge that she could take charge of Sword Pavilion, making her the Sword Pavilion Master. In 2 months, there will be an annual Sword Marquis token battle in Sword Pavilion Mansion, which is when Jian Menge can prove her astounding strength in the presence of the strong experts in Bahui Commandery. Then, with everyone bearing witness, she will be awarded the title of Sword Pavilion Master.
Amazing.
It is really amazing that a 16-year-old girl has reached the profound spiritual sea realm. It won everyone's exclamations except for Jian Wushuang, who was standing by the side and turned pale at this news. Did Menge really reach the profound spiritual sea realm? Will she really take charge as the Sword Pavilion Master in 2 months?
No. No way.
I can't believe that. Clenching his fists, Jian Wushuang rushed to the courtyard of her residence as if he had gone mad.
His heart was a mess.
It can't be true. He could not believe it was true. It was known to all that Sword Pavilion belonged to their disciples, and since his father was the Sword Pavilion Master, he was the only heir. He remembered that his father had told him that only disciples from Sword Pavilion could take charge of it. And that was his lifelong dream. So how could he let others steal and destroy his dream? Jian Wushuang came to the courtyard where he had been practicing swordsmanship with Jian Menge every day. Normally, Jian Menge would have been waiting here already, but today, after Jian Wushuang arrived at the courtyard, he didn't see her in their usual spot. There was only Jian Lan, wearing a black robe. He stood with his hands behind his back and waited for him quietly. Jian Wushuang had a bad feeling. Uncle Lan, Jian Wushuang called him as usual. You're here.
Jian Lan turned.
His usual mild face had changed completely into a cold and distant one. You must have heard everything. Today the Mansion Master appointed Menge as the new Sword Pavilion Master. After the Sword Marquis token battle, a succession ceremony will be hosted. By the way, the token representing the status of Sword Pavilion Master is currently with you.
Jian Wushuang was shocked.
The token representing the Sword Pavilion Master was the most powerful sword in Sword Marquis Mansion, Triple Kill Sword. It had been brought back by a man, trusted by his father, not long after he disappeared. In the last 4 years, the sword had always been kept by him. It was the long sword on his back. Hand it over. Jian Lan said. Both Jian Wushuang's body and heart shook. Looking at Jian Lan, he ground his teeth in rage and said in a low voice, I want to see Menge. Menge, what status does she have? You think you can meet with whomever you wish? Jian Lan said with a sneer. Unless I see her, I will not hand it over, Jian Wushuang said defiantly. Even at this moment, he still had some hope deep in his heart that all this had been Jian Lan's idea and that Jian Meng'er was being forced into it.
How dare you? Jian Lan shouted.
He was getting angry.
Father.
A beautiful girl dressed in white came out of the house slowly. Jian Meng'er.
Meng'er.
Jian Wushuang turned eagerly toward her. That one glance destroyed his last hope. He noticed that Jian Meng'er's eyes were cold and ruthless. Jian Wushuang suddenly realized that Jian Meng'er had not been forced. You've been lying to me? Jian Wushuang asked, staring at her.
Lying to you? No.
Jian Meng'er shook her head. I never promised you anything. Even though you taught me swordsmanship as I asked, I never forced you.
It was a deal.
You instructed me, and I accompanied you for 4 years.
It's fair. Only a deal?
Jian Wushuang asked again with a wan smile. You should know that the triple kill sword was sent back by a man trusted by my father. It may be the only clue to find him.
I know. Jian Meng'er nodded.
You also know that my greatest wish in life is to succeed my father and take charge of Sword Pavilion with the triple kill sword in hand one day, don't you? Jian Wushuang continued to ask.
Yes.
Jian Meng'er nodded again. However, it is just a dream for you. It will never be realized. After all, you are trash who is incapable of cultivating spiritual power. Trash. Jian Wushuang couldn't stop laughing at himself. It was just early this very morning that he had cultivated the heavenly creation skill and finally condensed some spiritual power. He had become a real warrior now. He could hardly wait to share this with her. Who would have thought she had been thinking he was trash the entire time? A pitiful person who couldn't cultivate spiritual power?
Jian Wushuang, things have happened.
There is no need to haggle over this endlessly. It will only make you appear weaker. If you are not reconciled with what you have suffered, you can challenge me fairly. In this world, strength gives you power and rights. People take advantage of you when you are weak. Who can you blame for that? Jian Meng'er said with indifference.
So that's it? Because I'm too weak?
Jian Wushuang said with a faint smile. However, the smile on his face was a sad one. So I have always been a fool.
Haha, stupid.
I am so stupid. I am the biggest fool in the world.
I am an idiot.
Jian Wushuang roared as if he was insane. Jian Lan and Jian Meng'er stood nearby and looked at him quietly without any mercy in their eyes. What she had said was the brutal truth. In this world, people survived according to the law of the jungle. Jian Wushuang laughed sadly. But in the meantime, his brain seemed to have been struck by thousands of thunderbolts simultaneously. His face was twisted and his eyes were complicated, first disbelief, then shock, and at last anger, almost to the point of insanity. Several seconds later, Jian Wushuang suddenly stopped laughing. When he looked up again, his eyes had returned to calmness. Both Jian Lan and Jian Meng'er noticed his transformation.
They were quite astonished.
However, they didn't notice the radical change Jian Wushuang had gone through in his inner heart in such a short time. The originally innocent and simple-minded Jian Wushuang was gone. Instead, the man who remained seemed to have experienced decades of vicissitudes in life. After taking a deep breath, Jian Wushuang looked back at Jian Meng'er. The look was marrow-freezing and not at all tender. Jian Meng'er couldn't help feeling a chill under his intense gaze. These eyes, how cold they were. Like a venomous snake eyeing its prey.
Jian Meng'er, you're right.
Only the weak pray for pity. Experts prove themselves with strength. So,
Jian Wushuang said in a cold voice.
He pulled the triple kill sword from his back, raising it.
Shwa.
The sharp sword edge scratched a bleeding wound on Jian Wushuang's palm. A burning pain shot through his hand while he clenched his bloody fist. Painful as it was, he gazed at Jian Meng'er and said, In 2 months during the Sword Marquee token battle, the day when you will succeed the position of Sword Pavilion Master in public, I will challenge you. I swear I will make you all know that the Sword Pavilion forever belongs to Sword Pavilion. It belongs to my father, belongs to me. It is impossible for anyone else to have a hand in it. I will kill everyone who attempts to encroach. Blood flowed along his arm slowly and dripped on the ground. His words sounded sonorous and forceful. As for the triple kill sword?
Humph.
Looking at the sword in his hand, Jian Wushuang sneered and said, You want it?
Here you are.
Jian Wushuang threw triple kill sword towards Jian Meng'er, then he turned and went straight outside. At the very moment before he left the courtyard, Jian Wushuang stopped and said coldly,
I will see you in 2 months.
Wearing a slight frown and looking at Jian Wushuang's departure and lonely back in blank amazement, Jian Meng'er suddenly felt that the triple kill sword in her hand was extremely heavy.
Humph.
Trash who can't even condense spiritual power wants to challenge you in 2 months.
He must be kidding.
It would be better for him to become a real warrior within 2 months. Standing nearby, Jian Lan laughed in disdain. Hearing this, Jian Meng'e relaxed her furrowed brows.
That's right.
He is still trash who can't condense spiritual power.
How dare he fight with me in 2 months?
It is an absolute joke. Jian Wushuang went back to his courtyard alone and locked himself inside.
Jian Meng'e, ha ha.
Jian Wushuang laughed at himself. He thought of these 4 years he had spent with her. Their time together had created wonderful memories for him, but now all these memories had become sharp thorns that caused him extreme pain.
Weak. Yes, she's right.
Ultimately, my strength is too weak. If I was stronger and more powerful than Jian Meng'e, then she would never dare to say words like that in front of me. With that strength, there is no hope for her in taking charge of Sword Pavilion.
Strength?
Jian Wushuang's eyes were cold. No one knew what a radical mental change he had gone through in just 1 day. No outsider can ever lay a finger on Sword Pavilion even for 1 day. In 2 months, I must defeat Jian Meng'e in a fair way before she officially succeeds to the position of Sword Pavilion Master.
2 months. He clenched his fists tightly.
Maybe for others, it was impossible to cultivate from condensing spiritual power to Jian Meng'e's level, the profound spiritual sea realm, but Jian Wushuang was different. After all, he had cultivated the heavenly creation skill, a heaven-defying martial art. And since it was a heaven-defying cultivation method, he should be able to cultivate in defiance of the natural order. Sword Marquee Mansion was located within Bahui Prefecture, Tianyan Province of Tianzong Dynasty. It was one of the main powers within Bahui Prefecture, and it focused exclusively on sword principle. There were 2 factions in Sword Marquee Mansion, Sword Pavilion and Red Martial Hall. These 2 factions had fought both overtly and covertly, but Sword Pavilion had always prevailed. However, when Jian Nantian, the Sword Pavilion Master, disappeared 4 years ago, Sword Pavilion lost its backbone. Its overall strength suffered a disastrous decline, and so did its right of speech. The Sword Pavilion was at an absolute disadvantage in the fight with Red Martial Hall. It was yesterday that the position of Sword Pavilion Master had been taken away by Jian Meng'e from Red Martial Hall. The Sword Pavilion. Dressed in white and with a common long sword on his back, Jian Wushuang walked up to the door of the Sword Pavilion. Looking at the 2 words Sword Pavilion at the top, his mood was extremely complex. He hesitated for a moment and then stepped into the Sword Pavilion. When Jian Wushuang appeared in the Sword Pavilion, many disciples who had been practicing swordsmanship could not help looking at him.
Is that Jian Wushuang? Yes, it's him. He is a traitor.
He taught many first-class sword arts from our Sword Pavilion to a person from the Red Martial Hall. How dare he come here?
Alas. We cannot blame him. After all, he was cheated.
And if Jian Meng'e takes charge of Sword Pavilion, he will suffer the most.
Please stop talking like that. He is in pain.
There was a lot of whispering in the Sword Pavilion. Most of the eyes upon him were full of mercy. The news that Jian Meng'e would take charge of Sword Pavilion had spread all over the Sword Marquee Mansion, so the news that she had mastered all 18 first-class sword arts of Sword Pavilion to profound level naturally had run through here. Generally speaking, these first-class sword arts could not be taught to outsiders. Even core disciples could only cultivate 1 or 2. So how had Jian Meng'e mastered all 18 first-class sword arts at the same time? The answer was obvious.
Jian Wushuang had taught her.
In the whole Sword Pavilion, only Jian Wushuang knew all 18 first-class sword arts. Because of his father's position, he had learned swordsmanship from childhood and his father had taught him these 18 techniques. The Sword Pavilion was full of murmuring and comments, but Jian Wushuang did not stop. He walked directly into the inner hall with an indifferent expression. Inside the hall, a gray-haired elder in a gray robe was looking through a thread-bound book, but when he saw Jian Wushuang coming in, he stopped surprised.
Young
Pavilion Master. The gray-robed elder said in a constrained voice.
Elder Hong.
Jian Wushuang said humbly. His eyes were full of guilt. For years, the Sword Pavilion elders had exerted their utmost efforts for the Sword Pavilion. However, due to his stupidity, the position of Sword Pavilion Master had changed hands and was being taken charge of by a person from the Red Martial Hall. So Jian Wushuang felt guilty.
This isn't your fault.
You are too young and don't understand these schemes. We, the Sword Pavilion elders, are not going to blame you. Elder Hong saw the guilty look in Jian Wushuang's eyes and shook his head with a smile. If someone should be blamed, it should be Jian Lan and Jian Meng'e. Their means were too dishonorable. Especially that Jian Meng'e, I have met her several times. But I had never thought that she could hide her schemes so deeply. With such a mind at a young age, her future achievements will be great. It is not too bad that the Sword Pavilion has fallen into her hands.
Sword Pavilion.
Only disciples from the Sword Pavilion can take charge of it. Jian Wushuang said firmly. Elder Hong was startled for a moment, and then he could only shake his head helplessly. In the bottom of his heart, he was extremely reluctant to let Jian Meng'er take charge of Sword Pavilion, but now these things had happened. What could he do? He could only comfort himself. Elder Hong, I want to go inside the human-level cultivation room, Jian Wushuang said suddenly in a serious tone. The human-level cultivation room?
Elder Hong was shocked.
The human-level cultivation room was an exclusive secret chamber for cultivation in the Sword Pavilion. Besides the human-level cultivation room, there were the earth-level cultivating room and the heaven-level cultivating room. These three cultivation rooms could help to promote cultivation, but they also had some disadvantages. Few disciples came here to cultivate in them regularly. However, Jian Wushuang had not even condensed any spiritual power. What could he do in the human-level cultivation room? Although Elder Hong was puzzled, he nodded his head and said, "Come with me." Soon, Elder Hong led Jian Wushuang to a secret chamber. "Young pavilion master, you came to this cultivation room for cultivation 4 years ago, and you are familiar with the environment inside.
Don't force yourself.
If you cannot carry on, you should come out as soon as possible." Elder Hong warned him patiently.
I know.
Jian Wushuang nodded and then stepped into the secret chamber. There was no decoration in this simple secret chamber. When Jian Wushuang entered the secret chamber, he felt a terrible force rushing toward him and oppressing him. He felt like he was mired down in mud, and it was very difficult to make any gestures or movements. This force was the unique pressure of the human-level cultivation room. It was tyrannical. Under this force, every movement in the secret chamber became extremely difficult. Even if a person wanted to stand, he had to rely on spiritual power to resist it. In this way, the speed of spiritual power consumption would be quite alarming. In general, if a common warrior in the first step of the spirit path merely stood in the human-level cultivation room, his spiritual power would run out in no more than 8 minutes. If he practiced swordsmanship in this room, the speed of spiritual power consumption would be incredible.
Let me start.
Jian Wushuang's face held no expression, and the long sword on his back was unsheathed.
Clang.
The sword light flashed around with unpredictable changes in speed. The light would dim and brighten at random moments. Sometimes the whole energy was focused on one point, while sometimes it was separated in every ray of the sword light. This was one of the Sword Marquis Mansion's first-class sword arts. It was called Bright Moon Sword Art. In the human-level cultivation room, Jian Wushuang began to practice swordsmanship, but under the effect of its tyrannical gravity, the spiritual power within his body was consumed at an unbelievable speed. In a mere moment, before he even practiced the whole Bright Moon Sword Art, he found his spiritual power had already drained out. Without hesitation, Jian Wushuang promptly sheathed his long sword and trudged to a corner at the right side of this secret chamber. There existed a yellowish cattail hassock. It was made for people to regain their spiritual power with no interruption from the unique gravity. Sitting on the cattail hassock, Jian Wushuang started to use heavenly creation skill, and a flow of spiritual power came to him from all directions, aggregating in his dantian through his 8 extra meridians at a ridiculous speed. After 10 minutes, Jian Wushuang stood up again. His overall spiritual power had reached the peak, even stronger than before. Just as I thought, the speed of the heavenly creation skill to absorb the spiritual power of heaven and earth is far faster than that of ordinary cultivation means. Certainly, the speed of regaining spiritual power is quick. That's true, because when the spiritual power is used up, a common warrior cannot reach the peak unless he spends several hours recovering. I only need 10 minutes. Jian Wushuang's eyes sparkled with joy. This was another impressive strength of heavenly creation skill compared with other means. The speed of cultivation was fast, as was the speed of restoring spiritual power. And this recovery speed in the human-level cultivation room was almost the same as a cheating device during cultivation. It should be known that the process of exhausting spiritual power and then fully recovering it was very helpful to cultivation. Performing a complete cycle would allow even an ordinary warrior to improve his spiritual power considerably each time he did this. Jian Wushuang cultivated a heaven-defying cultivation method. Therefore, his improvement in spiritual power would be higher. As soon as he recovered to the peak, he immediately noticed that his spiritual power had improved a lot. This was the advantage of cultivating in the human-level cultivation room. For ordinary warriors, their speed of regaining spiritual power was too slow, so it was not effective for them to complete any more than 2 cycles a day at most. Besides, it was depressing and intolerable to cultivate in this room. Normally, very few disciples would choose to cultivate here. Occasionally, some disciples who couldn't break through a bottleneck would come here and try to forcibly break through using the gravity in this room. Just as Jian Wushuang had cultivated in this human-level cultivation room once 4 years ago when he couldn't gather his spiritual power. The heavenly creation skill that I cultivate makes my speed of regaining spiritual power unimaginable. Others can only finish the cultivation cycle twice a day, while I can finish 20 times a day at least. That means that my cultivation will be at least 10 times the speed of ordinary warriors. Heavenly creation skills cultivation speed was fast enough. Besides, with the help of the human-level cultivation room, his cultivation speed would be so fast that he could enter the second heaven of the divine path within 1 or 2 days. I took 4 years longer than others to become a warrior, so I must work harder than common people so that I won't be left behind anymore. A keen light burst out from Jian Wushuang's eyes. From then on, he became fully immersed in cultivating in the human-level cultivation room. The cultivation cycle began with him completely exhausting the spiritual power and ended after recovering it to its peak. Each cycle helped him improve his spiritual power further. What's more, he could finish dozens of cultivation cycles almost every day. The cultivation speed was also 10 times faster than ordinary warriors, possibly even more. 10 days passed in the blink of an eye. In front of the gate of Sword Pavilion. Bang! With the sound of a deep crash, a Sword Pavilion disciple was relentlessly thrown into the sky. He fell heavily to the ground. Haha, Sword Pavilion disciples are so weak. The laughter came from a purple-robed youth. He was obviously not a disciple from Sword Pavilion, yet he stood domineeringly in front of the gate of Sword Pavilion. Hearing his words, many disciples around him were resentful but couldn't do anything. There is nothing great about reaching the 6th step earlier than me and having stronger spiritual power than me. The defeated disciple stood up and spoke indignantly. It's a fact that you have been defeated, you still don't want to accept it? Our disciples from Sword Pavilion all like you. The youth completely ignored the homicidal stare with a sneer. What? He turned his gaze, seeing Jian Wushuang walking toward Sword Pavilion, and then gave him a wicked smile. As usual, Jian Wushuang had come to cultivate in Sword Pavilion. However, as he came to the door of Sword Pavilion, is that the young pavilion master, Jian Wushuang? A mocking voice came all of a sudden. Jian Wushuang stopped and saw the purple-robed youth with slightly closed eyes. He had a slight impression of this youth. He knew his name was Jian Lin, and that he was an excellent disciple of Red Martial Hall. More importantly, he knew Jian Lin had a crush on Jian Menger and tried to please her all the time. But unfortunately, Jian Menger had been with Jian Wushuang for 4 years so as to study the 18 first-class sword arts of Sword Pavilion. This made Jian Lin hate Jian Wushuang very much out of jealousy. Jian Lin had never had a chance to fight with Jian Wushuang on account of Jian Lan and Jian Menger. With a sword in hand, no one is his match. The name is good, but you don't deserve it, Jian Lin sneered at Jian Wushuang without any scruple. Besides, you even want to gain Menger's love. It's like a toad trying to eat swan meat. You should look at yourself. Why would Menger love trash who can't even cultivate spiritual power? Jian Wushuang glanced at Jian Lin. Instead of getting angry, he laughed ironically and said, "You're right, people like me don't deserve Jian Menger. I'll give her to you." Give her to me? Jian Lin was puzzled at first, and then became rampant. Damn it, you think I need trash like you to give her to me? Jian Wushuang laughed coldly. Without another word he walked back toward Sword Pavilion. Trash, stop right there. Jian Lin roared. Jian Wushuang ignored him and continued walking. Bastard, how dare you ignore me? Jian Lin scolded. His face was distorted. He moved his body and a palm struck toward Jian Wushuang's back. Noticing the wind behind his back, Jian Wushuang suddenly turned back with cold eyes. His right hand punched out powerfully and vigorously as spiritual power instantly burst out from him. Get out of my way. As Jian Wushuang roared, the voice lashed out along with the strength of his arm. Jian Wushuang's fist crashed into Jian Lin's palm. Bang! Jian Wushuang stumbled back a few steps, while Jian Lin was also forced to take a step back. Though he was pushed only 1 step back, Jian Lin was completely shocked. How come? Jian Lin glared at Jian Wushuang with bulging eyes. He hadn't dared to hit too hard, so the palm hadn't contained too much power. But even so, an ordinary person wouldn't be able to bear it easily, while Jian Wushuang had even forced him to retreat. The 3rd step. He's reached at least the 3rd step of the spirit path, or even the peak of the 3rd step. Jian Lin said with horror. In front of the Sword Pavilion, in addition to Jian Wushuang and Jian Lin, there were a large number of Sword Pavilion disciples. They all saw what happened and felt confused. He forced Jian Lin back? How could this be? Peak of the 6th step of the spirit path. Jian Lin is at the peak of the 6th step of the spirit path. Even though he didn't use all his strength, no ordinary person could take it. Not to mention Jian Lin was forced back. The 3rd step, his cultivation is at the 3rd step of the spirit path. Has Jian Wushuang gathered spiritual power and become a warrior? Is his cultivation at the 3rd step of the spirit path? It was shocking. All the Sword Pavilion disciples were amazed. Just 10 days ago, Jian Wushuang had not gathered any spiritual power. But now, after only 10 days had passed, he had not only gathered spiritual power, but also cultivated to the third step of the spirit path. In 10 days, he had gone from becoming a warrior to reaching the third step of the spirit path after continuous breakthroughs.
What did that mean?
They did not know that Jian Wushuang cultivated heavenly creation skill and couldn't be thought of as an ordinary person. He had a heaven-defying cultivation method. 10 days ago, although he had just gathered the spiritual power, his cultivation speed with heavenly creation skill was faster than ordinary people. What's more, he had done frantic and desperate cultivation in the human-level cultivation room, where 1 day's cultivation for Jian Wushuang was worth dozens of days of cultivation for ordinary people. After 10 days, he had had a direct breakthrough from the first heaven of the divine path to the third heaven of the divine path. Of course, he had just had the breakthrough and only reached the third heaven. The reason Jian Lin thought he had reached the peak of the third step of spirit path was that he cultivated heavenly creation skill. So his strength was significantly more than other warriors at the same level. Kid, I admit that I underestimated you. I did not expect that you could gather spiritual power. But it doesn't matter with only the third step of the spirit path. In front of me, you are still trash. Jian Lin stared at Jian Wushuang. The spiritual power welling up from his palms showed that he was going all out. Jian Wushuang narrowed his eyes. No matter what, he could not withstand an attack from someone who cultivated to the peak of the sixth step of the spirit path now.
At this moment.
What are you doing? There was a low growl, then Elder Hong in his grey robe came out from Sword Pavilion.
Elder Hong.
Several Sword Pavilion disciples respectfully saluted at once. Seeing the elder, Jian Lin immediately stopped and changed his look. The formidable spiritual power welling up from him was drawn back. At the same time he saluted, Elder Hong. Elder Hong glanced at Jian Lin and snorted, You are Jian Lin, huh? With cultivation at the peak of the sixth step of the spirit path, you are pretty good among disciples at the same level. Relying on a slightly deeper cultivation, you are showing off your strength in front of the Sword Pavilion. Do you really think there is no one who can deal with you in Sword Pavilion? I dare not. Jian Lin quickly shook his head, with cold sweat falling down instantly. He pretty much knew that, even if the position of Sword Pavilion had declined markedly in the Sword Marquee Mansion, the four great elders of Sword Pavilion, all of whom were at the spiritual sea realm, were the backbone of the mansion. Especially Elder Hong, his strength was absolutely in the top 3 in the current Sword Marquee Mansion. Facing such a strong man, even though he was conceited, he dared not be rude. Get out of here now, Elder Hong scolded. Okay, Jian Lin replied immediately. But as he was leaving, he glanced at Jian Wushuang and said with a sneer, Jian Wushuang, I heard that you went to find Meng'er the day she was appointed as the new Sword Pavilion Master, and boldly threw down a personal challenge for the annual Sword Marquee token battle in 2 months? All those around were puzzled at first. This was the first time they were hearing this. They looked at Jian Wushuang. 2 months later, Jian Wushuang would challenge Jian Meng'er? Was this a joke? There are many folks in this world who are foolish and arrogant. But I have never met such a foolish and arrogant person as you. With just the third step of the spirit path, you are actually thinking of defeating Meng'er, who is in the profound spiritual sea realm? Haha, my laughter is killing me. Jian Lin left. But his unscrupulous laughter echoed in front of the Sword Pavilion. Jian Wushuang just stood there, with an apathetic expression. Many people gazed at him with regret in their eyes. Some eyes were even filled with ridicule and disdain, just like Jian Lin's. Even Elder Hong was looking at Jian Wushuang with a quiet, complex expression. In 2 months he is challenging Jian Meng'er? Was Jian Wushuang going to rely on his cultivation at the third step of the spirit path? All the Sword Pavilion disciples thought that was just wishful thinking for Jian Wushuang. After Jian Lin left, Elder Hong winked at Jian Wushuang. Immediately they went inside the hall of Sword Pavilion. Young Pavilion Master, congratulations. You have finally become a real warrior after 4 years' endeavor, Elder Hong smiled. He had seen everything that had occurred outside the Sword Pavilion just now and had surely seen Jian Lin get knocked back by Jian Wushuang. But it is not enough just to be a warrior, Jian Wushuang said in a downcast voice. Elder Hong looked at Jian Wushuang seriously and asked, Young Pavilion Master, do you really want to fight with Jian Meng'er at the Sword Marquee token battle? Yes, this competition is inevitable, Jian Wushuang said firmly. Elder Hong thought it was impossible. Young Master of the Pavilion, you should know that during a warrior's cultivation, the breakthrough of each level is much harder. It will also take a very long time.
Only 2 months.
As far as I know, in the whole Sword Marquee Mansion, the only one who ever made such great progress in 2 months was the Pavilion Master, your father. When the Pavilion Master was young, in 2 months he reached the 6th step of the spirit path from the 2nd step of the spirit path. He had a direct breakthrough of 4 levels, which greatly defied the natural order. The reason the Pavilion Master had such a breakthrough was that, first of all, he had a great gift for cultivation, together with the support of a large number of pills from the Sword Marquis Mansion. The most important thing was that the Pavilion Master spent those 2 months in the gladiator arena and participated in combat with opponents almost every day. Only because of struggling with life and death in the arena could he progress so fast. However, the Pavilion Master only had a breakthrough from the 2nd step of the Spirit Path to the 6th step of the Spirit Path. Elder Hong stared at Jian Wushuang. But that could not sway him from his decision, not even a little. Of course, he understood what Elder Hong said. It had taken his father 2 months to break through the 2nd step of the Spirit Path and reach the 6th step of the Spirit Path, which was incredible. However, what he was going to do was much harder. Jian Menger is already at the profound spiritual sea realm. I need to reach at least the level of the 7th heaven of the divine path. Then by virtue of heavenly creation skill and my swordsmanship, as well as the soul-devouring secret skill, it is possible for me to defeat her. And from the 3rd heaven of the divine path to the 7th heaven of the divine path, it is same in that they both need to break through 4 levels. But it is at least 10 times harder than that from the 2nd step of the Spirit Path to the 6th step of the Spirit Path.
But I am a defiant cultivator.
Every step I take will be out of the ordinary and in defiance of the natural order.
Other people cannot do it. But for me, it is possible.
Jian Wushuang had made up his mind.
His eyes became more determined.
Seeing this, Elder Hong asked, "Do you really want to try?"
Of course.
But I will not just try, I will defeat her in 2 months. Jian Wushuang's eyes were grim. In that case, I will not say anything more. But I have something that may be able to help you. Elder Hong took out a jade box from his bosom and then opened it. Inside the jade box were 2 milk-white pills. Spirit cultivating pill? Jian Wushuang was momentarily surprised, but immediately shook his head.
That doesn't seem right.
The fragrance is too strong. It can't be an ordinary pill. Could it be a first-class pill? Spirit cultivating pills were taken exclusively by warriors in the Spirit Path realm. It would greatly aid the cultivation of warriors of that level. However, there were 2 kinds of spirit cultivating pills. The first-class pills were 10 times rarer and more effective than ordinary pills. Furthermore, it had nearly no impurities, so a warrior could use it without any worries. A first-class spirit cultivating pill was a precious treasure. Not even hundreds of ordinary pills could match up to a first-class pill in market value. There were many alchemists in the pill refining room of the Sword Marquis Mansion, but none managed to produce a first-class pill. That was why there were none in the mansion. If there was truly a need for it, the mansion could only purchase it from the gladiator arena. Jian Wushuang didn't expect Elder Hong to have 1 first-class spirit cultivating pill, let alone a whopping 2. I paid a considerable price to buy these 2 first-class spirit cultivating pills from the gladiator arena. I was planning on finding a good disciple and giving him these pills. I didn't think the Sword Pavilion would be hit by such a big crisis before I could even find one. So I'll hand these 2 pills to you, young master. I hope they'll be useful to you, Elder Hong said, smiling. Elder Hong, Jian Wushuang looked at Elder Hong but didn't stretch out his hands to accept the pills. A first-class spirit cultivating pill is extremely potent. A warrior in the Spirit Path realm typically needs a month to absorb the pill completely, and now you have 2. That's enough time for you to fully absorb these 2 pills. I believe it'll greatly help your cultivation.
Just take them, Elder Hong said.
Thank you so much. Jian Wushuang nodded, accepting the jade box without putting up a show of pretense. Elder Hong, rest assured the Sword Pavilion won't collapse while I'm still alive. In 2 months, I'll properly defeat Jian Menger of the Red Martial Hall before everyone in the Sword Marquis token battle. I'll let everyone know that the only one who could be the Sword Pavilion Master is a disciple of the Sword Pavilion. When he was done talking, Jian Wushuang turned and stepped into a cultivating room once again. Only this time he entered the Earth-level cultivating room, one of the 3 big cultivating rooms in the Sword Pavilion. Elder Hong remained rooted on the ground, watching as Jian Wushuang walked into the cultivating room. A trace of a smile gradually appeared on his face. Young Master's temperament is really similar to the Master's.
Stubborn.
Yes. Pavilion Master was just as stubborn. But to defeat Jian Menger in just 2 months, that's not just difficult but nearly impossible. Elder Hong shook his head. On the same day Jian Menger was appointed as the Sword Pavilion Master, he personally had a fight with her. He realized she had unusual strength despite her young age. Having reached the exceptional spiritual sea realm long ago, it would be nearly impossible for a warrior with the usual profound spiritual sea realm to continue a fight against him for 20 movements. Yet Jian Menger succeeded. I really hope our young master will manage a miracle in 2 months. It's a joyful occasion that he has condensed spiritual power to be a warrior. I need to let that person in the Golden Dragon Palace know. The enormous pressure of the Earth-level cultivating room was far greater than that of the human-level cultivation room. Inside the room, the spiritual power within Jian Wushuang's body was consumed even more quickly. Yet he continued practicing his ethereal and fluid swordsmanship with his shadow mirroring his actions. The swordsmanship he used was the Blue Cloud Sword art, one of many top mysterious arts from the Sword Pavilion. Jian Meng'er had once performed all the 18 first-class sword arts of Sword Pavilion at the profound level, causing everyone in Sword Marquee Mansion to marvel at her talent in sword principles. They were so busy admiring her that they had forgotten that it was he, Jian Wushuang, who imparted each of those sword arts to her. He was the true genius of sword principles. Now, Jian Meng'er was recognized as the #1 sword principle talent by the whole Sword Marquee Mansion. But even she understood clearly that he was countless times more gifted in sword principles than she was. Take the Blue Cloud Sword art for example. He had truly pushed it to great heights, whereas her performance was just like a little kid's trick. His swordsmanship practice sped up the consumption of his spiritual power, but he was prepared and had already swallowed a first-class spirit-cultivating pill earlier. The elixir was incredibly potent. After taking one, the typical warrior would need a month or more to absorb its effects completely. Jian Wushuang, with the help of heavenly creation skill, already felt the pill flowing quickly throughout his body. In just a night, he had completely absorbed the benefits of the first-class spirit-cultivating pill. That allowed him to make a direct breakthrough to the fourth heaven of the divine path. The fourth heaven of the divine path. Jian Wushuang clenched his fists, feeling the booming power within him. He had just broken through the third heaven of the divine path yesterday and made another breakthrough today. It was thanks to the potency of the first-class spirit-cultivating pill as well as the wonders of the heavenly creation skill. The pill that others needed a month or longer to absorb, he had absorbed within the span of one night. The heavenly creation skill is really magical. With the heavenly creation skill, I actually needed just a day to absorb the great effects of the first-class spirit-cultivating pill. If I have more then... His eyes gleamed red as he thought about this. I want those first-class spirit-cultivating pills. The more the better. Jian Wushuang's heart was burning with these thoughts. The first-class spirit-cultivating pill, capable of being absorbed in a short time, greatly improved his cultivation. Of course, he thirsted for more. What a pity that those pills weren't so easy to obtain. Not even the Sword Marquee Mansion is capable of producing these pills. Perhaps only the Gladiator Arena is capable of mass-producing them in Bahui Prefecture, Jian Wushuang muttered to himself. The Gladiator Arena was a giant chamber of commerce and enjoyed a high status in Bahui Prefecture. If the Sword Marquee Mansion needed ingredients or even pills in bulk, they would certainly purchase those things from the Gladiator Arena. Meanwhile, what attracted people the most about the Gladiator Arena were its duels and life-and-death battles. Jian Wushuang's father, for example, experienced many battles in the Gladiator Arena over the span of 2 months and made great progress in that time. These pills are so expensive that they're beyond my means at the moment. If that's the case, I only have one other way. No matter what happens, I need to give it a go, Jian Wushuang said firmly, staring at the only first-class spirit-cultivating pill left in his palm. Madness and desire colored his expression. A duel. The reason why duels at the Gladiator Arena drew so much attention was the existence of duels leading to fighting and slaughtering between warriors. Although Bahui Prefecture was just one of the 108 prefectures in Tianyan Province, its territory was still vast. The Sword Marquee Mansion was publicly recognized as the strongest force within Bahui Prefecture. But there was, in fact, another stronger force. However, this force had been keeping a low profile and never engaged in fights. Thus, the title of the strongest force was given to the Sword Marquee Mansion. That transcendent force was none other than the Gladiator Arena. The royals of Tianzong dynasty were said to be behind the Gladiator Arena. The arena, which was actually the strongest force, was present in every province and county of the Tianzong dynasty. In Bahui Prefecture, the Gladiator Arena was located in its very center. A masked figure wearing white robes and carrying a long sword ambled into the Gladiator Arena. An attendant welcomed him and said, "Your Excellency, what can we do for you?" "I want a duel," Jian Wushuang replied. "Duel?" The attendant lifted his brows without any surprise. The Gladiator Arena ran a variety of events, among which duels were the most common event. "Please tell me your name and cultivation level," the attendant said. "Call me Nan." "As for my cultivation level..." With a flick of his wrist, a jet of spiritual power burst out from Jian Wushuang. "The fourth step of the spirit path?" The attendant smiled faintly. There were innumerable warriors coming for duels in this place. Warriors in the Transforming Sea realm or even in Gold Core realm had participated. Warriors at Jian Wushuang's level were all too common. What do you want to bet, Mr. Nan? The attendant asked.
This.
Jian Wushuang took out the wooden box and opened it. Spirit cultivating pill? The attendant recognized the item at a glance but didn't think much of it. A few seconds later, his expression immediately changed. This is a first-class spirit cultivating pill? Mr. Nan, let's talk in another place. Follow me, the attendant said, lowering his voice. Jian Wushuang put away his wooden box and nodded. He followed the attendant into a secret chamber where another servant was waiting. The servant was dressed in black robes, clearly having a higher status in this arena. Mr. Nan, our arena is operated in every city of Tianzong dynasty and our rules are well known. I believe you're also aware of it, the black-robed servant said, looking at Jian Wushuang.
I understand.
When you take part in a life-or-death duel, your victory and life is your responsibility.
Jian Wushuang nodded.
In that case, I'll arrange a suitable opponent for you as soon as possible. As for that first-class spirit cultivating pill, please hand it to me now. The black-robed servant looked at Jian Wushuang.
Sure.
Jian Wushuang was already aware of the criteria and he didn't hesitate to hand the pill over. May I know how many first-class spirit cultivating pills I get if I win?
It's always 1-to-1 in our arena.
If you bet one pill, then naturally you'll only win one. Of course, you can keep dueling if you're confident, the black-robed servant said.
1-to-1.
Jian Wushuang frowned and shook his head.
That's too slow.
I don't have the time to duel this way. Do you have other special duels that would allow me to win more first-class spirit cultivating pills in one go?
Special duels?
Yes, we do. The black-robed servant nodded. If you want to win more pills, there's only one way. That's the rank-skipping challenge. The servant's smile never faltered. A victory in the rank-skipping challenge pays tenfold. In other words, you'll get 10 pills if you win. But it's not an easy challenge. 99% of our challengers don't succeed and most of them end up dead. The rank-skipping challenge? Jian Wushuang's expression darkened. Being in the fourth heaven of the divine path, he needed to fight with warriors in the fifth step of the spirit path who wanted to have a duel in the arena. Although I'm only in the fourth heaven, my heavenly creation skill is stronger than my peers. My spiritual power is also strong enough to rival the common warrior in the fourth step of the spirit path. There's still a big gap compared with the fifth step, but I have an advantage in martial arts technique. Jian Wushuang had absolute confidence in his own swordsmanship. My swordsmanship should be enough to compensate for the gap in spiritual power. Besides, I also have my trump card. Jian Wushuang's eyes gleamed, having made his decision. Alright, I'll take the rank-skipping challenge. Please arrange it for me. A middle-aged man dressed in a loose purple robe entered the gladiator arena.
Supervisor.
Greetings, Supervisor. Whenever the servants passed by the middle-aged man, they paid their respects with humility. Are there any particularly interesting duels going on? The man asked a servant.
Sir, you came right on time.
We'll have a unique life and deal duel very soon. One warrior is at the fifth realm of the spirit path, but the other is at the fourth realm. His breakthrough seems pretty recent too, the servant replied.
Oh, a rank-skipping challenge?
The purple-robed man raised an eyebrow and nodded as if he was intrigued. I'll go and check it out. Large amounts of spectators crowded around a bluestone arena in the heart of this vast place, all intrigued by the rank-skipping challenge. The purple-robed man found a seat amid the crowd at random, staring at the bluestone arena. With so many spectators around, the atmosphere at the bluestone arena was a chaotic cauldron of noise. The crowd raised an uproar when they saw a dark-skinned man with messy hair stepping onto the arena.
Spear Devil! Spear Devil!
Many spectators cheered and howled, filling the whole arena. The man stood in the arena with his long spear, his brass bell-like eyes sweeping the crowd. He suddenly grinned, revealing a set of white teeth and an expression teeming with ferocity. Spear Devil was considered an expert in the gladiator arena. In the fifth step of the spirit path, he had killed 2 same-level warriors in life-and-death battles using extremely brutal tactics. Due to the excellent use of his spear, he was nicknamed as such. On the other side of the arena, a masked Jian Wushuang was quietly standing with his long sword. His exposed eyes were fixed on his brutish opponent, keenly feeling the pressure coming from him. Jian Wushuang appeared grim. He knew his opponent was not merely a warrior in the fifth step of the spirit path. The fact that he could win 2 duels in this insane arena meant his strength was far greater. He really didn't want to fight with Spear Devil, much less in a life-and-death battle, if he didn't have to. But he simply had no choice. After all, time wasn't on his side. His unique identity was easily identifiable through his sword arts from the Sword Marquis Mansion. He couldn't participate in duel after duel in this arena at all. That left him only one choice: risking his life to take the rank-skipping challenge and try and win all the first-class spirit-cultivating pills he needed in one go. I've never heard of you, masked kid. It's probably your first time fighting in the gladiator arena. But you're really unlucky to meet me. Spear Devil stared coldly at Jian Wushuang as if he was a predator gazing at its prey. There were all sorts of people in the gladiator arena, including those who masked their identities like Jian Wushuang. Thus no one found him out of place.
Enough talk. Let's fight.
Jian Wushuang's voice was cold. The minute he finished his sentence, his spiritual power was already rising. The fourth step of the spirit path? Spear Devil was stunned and his face turned red with anger. You dare underestimate me? Spear Devil considered himself very tough after consecutively defeating two same-level warriors. But now, his opponent was just a warrior of the fourth step of the spirit path. When he considered this, he burst into a rage all of a sudden.
Go to hell.
His long spear pierced the air like a dragon, causing a shrill sonic boom and appearing in front of Jian Wushuang in the next moment. Spear Devil had also closed the gap of 10 meters between him and his opponent at the same time.
How fast?
Jian Wushuang was startled, but his own actions didn't slow.
Swoosh.
He drew his long sword out of the sheath, instantly producing a sword shadow that was too fast to catch. He swiped at his opponent as his spiritual power came bursting forth and pushed his strength to its peak.
Clang.
The sword and spear clashed with a crisp clanging sound. Jian Wushuang twisted his wrist, inclining his long sword forward. With a ghostly jumping movement, the sword crossed the body of the spear and sliced towards Spear Devil's hands.
This sword art.
In his shock, Spear Devil's disdain for his opponent vanished at once. Though it was just a simple sword movement, he realized that Jian Wushuang possessed marvelous swordsmanship. Get out, he thundered, forcefully swinging down his arms holding the long spear. His fearsome strength instantly repelled Jian Wushuang's attack. He turned around, wanting to launch a counteroffensive. Whether it's your spear or figure, they are too clumsy. Come up and be my target. Jian Wushuang's voice came to his ears, followed by his ethereal sword shadow one after another.
Fast. He was too fast.
It was so fast that it seemed impossible to have come out of a warrior in the fourth step of the spirit path. In addition, Jian Wushuang's swordplay also continually interrupted and gave Spear Devil no room to fight back. What great swordsmanship!
Fearsome.
This swordsmanship! A commotion was raised in the arena, with exclamations rising in succession. The crowd was aware that this battle was a rank-skipping challenge between a warrior of the fourth realm of the spirit path and a warrior of the fifth step of the spirit path. Typically, there was no surprise to such battles. After all, there was such a big disparity between the fourth step and the fifth step. However, everyone was astounded the minute the two started fighting. Spear Devil, who was in the fifth step of the spirit path, was actually completely suppressed by the masked warrior in the fourth step of the spirit path.
Interesting.
The middle-aged man in loose purple robe smiled when he saw the scene unfolding in the arena. The masked warrior ought to be a young man, but he has truly great swordsmanship. If I'm not mistaken, his sword art ought to be the fallen leaf sword art of the sword pavilion. It's just a general first-class sword art, but he has an excellent command of it and is capable of pushing it to great heights. His every move is clean without any unnecessary embellishment. This shows he has a great understanding of the sword art and a solid foundation. His talent in sword principles is extraordinary because he possesses such swordsmanship while so young. On the other hand, the way the man called Spear Devil used his spear is far inferior. If not for his stronger spiritual power, he would have lost at the very beginning. The middle-aged man in the loose purple robe was the supervisor of the gladiator arena and enjoyed foresight as great as his status. With just a glance, he managed to grasp the greatness of Jian Wushuang's swordsmanship as well as his talent in sword principles. The man wasn't wrong. Jian Wushuang had truly remarkable swordsmanship. He wouldn't have taken the rank-skipping challenge if he wasn't confident. On the arena, the battle was overwhelmingly in favor of one person.
How can this be?
How can his sword be so fast? I'm in the fifth step of the spirit path, but I can't even catch up to his speed. Spear Devil was aghast but quickly became agitated. Ah! Spear Devil growled, raging flames of anger burning in his eyes. He completely exploded in the next moment.
Boom!
The shrill sonic boom once again rang throughout the arena. Disregarding Jian Wushuang slashing at him, he immediately showed his strongest killing move, which had terrifying lethality. Look! Spear Devil is using his ultimate move. It's the 13 styles of cloud-piercing spear. Someone was yelling below the arena. The 13 styles of cloud-piercing spear was a continuous attack, with each fiercer and stronger than the one before it. It was the unique move that propelled Spear Devil to fame. The power was so fearsome that even Jian Wushuang couldn't help feeling nervous. He promptly used his long sword to resist the continuous and fierce spear attacks. Clang, 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 clang. His arms felt numb after blocking 12 spear attacks in a single breath. In the meantime, Spear Devil had accumulated his power and pushed it to an ultimate level, demonstrating the strongest and most terrifying 13th spear attack.
Die!
Spear Devil cried, face twisting with ferocity.
Go to hell!
Killing intent flashed in Jian Wushuang's eyes. Whoosh! The ice-cold sword shadow flashed before disappearing at once. The shadow was unimaginably fast, indescribably so. Vivid red spattered into the air. Spear Devil's ferocious smile remained etched on his face, but his eyes were filled with resentment and unwillingness. If one looked carefully, one could see a distinct sword wound on the vital part of his throat. Spear Devil, a warrior of the 5th realm of the spirit path who had won 2 life and death battles in succession, was killed. Jian Wushuang stood by Spear Devil's corpse, panting heavily.
What a close call.
They're indeed warriors who slaughter in the gladiator arena. Insanity is etched in their bones. He actually chose to fight life for life after being suppressed by my swordsmanship. I can't match up to his insanity. Fortunately, I had my trump card or it would have been my death today. Jian Wushuang sighed. Below the arena, everyone was stunned and shocked. Countless spectators were holding their breaths, watching the arena in disbelief. No one expected Spear Devil, a powerful warrior who had won 2 battles in succession, to die at the hands of a warrior in the 4th step of the spirit path. The rank-skipping challenge was actually a success? Within the audience, the middle-aged man in loose purple robe finally had a change in expression. Earlier he had seemed merely interested, but now he was looking grave. The sword art you used earlier. Is it the anonymous sword art?
I am not wrong.
That's anonymous sword art from Sword Marquee Mansion. The middle-aged man in a purple robe was astonished and couldn't help recalling the movements Jian Wushuang had demonstrated earlier. His movements were too fast. Though Jian Wushuang's strength was too weak to be a threat, he might not be able to fend off such an attack if it was made by someone on par with him. It was not his first time witnessing such terrifying swordsmanship. More than a decade ago, a powerful enemy had attacked the Sword Marquee Mansion and defeated many of its warriors. The Sword Pavilion Master, Jian Nantian, was the only exception. He alone killed the enemy, using precisely this sword art.
Anonymous sword art.
The supreme sword art of Sword Marquee Mansion. It existed only in legends, even within Sword Marquee Mansion. Anonymous sword art was simply too profound and mysterious, such that few could use it even after decades of intensive study, much less master it. Furthermore, this sword art was a non-inheritable top secret in Sword Pavilion. Only Sword Pavilion masters had access to study it, with only 3 of them in history being able to use it. The 18 first-class sword arts of Sword Pavilion may be mighty and extraordinary, but they were nothing compared to the legendary anonymous sword art. This young man actually managed to use the anonymous sword art. Though it was only the first move, it's nevertheless incredible. The middle-aged man in a purple robe stared at Jian Wushuang. The one he used before was the fallen leaf sword art. He has already reached great heights. As for anonymous sword art, it is the lifeblood of Sword Pavilion. Ordinary people completely don't have the chance to learn it. He's so young and only at the 4th step of the spirit path, but he's already capable of using so many sword arts of Sword Pavilion. He can even use the legendary anonymous sword art.
He must be.
The middle-aged man seemed to have already guessed Jian Wushuang's identity, and the corners of his mouth lifted.
Interesting.
Following the end of the life or death battle, Mr. Nan, here are your prizes. The black-robed servant of Gladiator Arena handed Jian Wushuang a wooden box. When he opened it, he saw 11 fragrant ivory pills lying inside, including the one that originally belonged to him. The odds of the life or death battle between warriors of the Gladiator Arena within the same rank was 1-to-1, but the rank-skipping challenge was 10-to-1. That was why he chose it. The greater the risk, the better the harvest. Jian Wushuang examined the wooden box thoroughly. When he was satisfied, he nodded and was ready to leave. The black-robed servant stopped him.
Mr. Nan, please wait for a moment.
Is there anything else? Jian Wushuang asked, eyes narrowed. The Gladiator Arena had an exceedingly strong status in the entire Tianzong dynasty and enjoyed great prestige. Though he didn't worry about what they would do to him just for a mere 11 first-class spirit-cultivating pills, he kept his guard up. Our supervisor watched your duel against Spear Devil and became interested in you, so he'd like to meet you, the black-robed servant said.
Oh.
Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows. Just then, the middle-aged man in a loose purple robe, flanked by a couple of golden-robed servants, entered slowly.
Haha. Mr. Nan, isn't it?
I'm Supervisor Bai Chong of the Gladiator Arena. You can call me Sir Bai Chong, the man said in a clear and bright voice. Surprised, Jian Wushuang immediately bowed.
Sir Bai Chong.
This man's status was nearly on par with the Sword Marquis Mansion Master, perhaps higher. Jian Wushuang had to show reverence. You can leave now, Bai Chong told the black-robed servant, waving a hand. The servant bowed and excused himself. Mr. Nan, I suppose the swordsmanship you used to kill Spear Devil is the anonymous sword art of Sword Pavilion? Bai Chong smiled faintly at Jian Wushuang and said, as far as I know, that's the top secret of Sword Pavilion that only successive Sword Pavilion masters are allowed to study. Now the only person in the entire Sword Pavilion who can possibly understand it is Jian Wushuang, the son of the missing master, Jian Nantian. He's the only one who has a chance of learning the anonymous sword art due to their relationship. So I'm wondering if you have anything to do with Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang's heart thumped, eyes revealing a hint of panic. Obviously, Bai Chong was already aware of his identity. I was discovered even though I only fought once. Jian Wushuang sighed helplessly. Truthfully, he had inherited the anonymous sword art from his father. This sword art was indeed the top sword art of Sword Pavilion. He had hidden it so well all this while that not even Jian Meng'er was aware of it. And he had chosen the rank-skipping challenge to get all the first-class spirit-cultivating pills he needed in one go because he was worried someone would recognize him if he showed up too much in the gladiator arena. Participating in one battle lowered those chances. Yet he was forced to use his strongest skill, anonymous sword art, against Spear Devil. He didn't expect a sharp-eyed man to be watching him among the crowd.
I'm just kidding.
Noticing the surprise in Jian Wushuang's eyes, Bai Chong immediately understood the situation and faked a laugh. From the looks of it, you seem to urgently need first-class spirit-cultivating pills. Is that right, Mr. Nan?
Yes. Jian Wushuang nodded.
Well, these first-class spirit-cultivating pills are beneficial to spirit path warriors, but they require a long time to be absorbed. You may have 11 first-class spirit-cultivating pills now, but you'll need at least a year to take in all of them, Bai Chong said.
You're right.
Jian Wushuang nodded but was disagreeing with him internally. It was true that other people would need at least a year to take in 11 first-class spirit-cultivating pills.
But he was different.
He was a deviant cultivator who cultivated the heavenly creation skill. Thanks to the amazing power of the heavenly creation skill, he could absorb these first-class spirit-cultivating pills very quickly. It wouldn't even take him a month to absorb all of them. It's too time-consuming to absorb all these first-class spirit-cultivating pills. If you want to boost your strength in a short amount of time, it doesn't seem realistic to merely rely on them, Bai Chong said. Sir Bai Chong, what are you trying to say? Jian Wushuang asked, frowning. Bai Chong smiled at him. Mr. Nan, have you heard of primordial spiritual liquid? Primordial spiritual liquid? Jian Wushuang was startled because he had heard about such spiritual liquid, which was formed by heaven and earth spiritual energy. As it contained extremely refined spiritual power, it was better at promoting a warrior's cultivation compared to sprite cultivating pills. However, its formation required very rare conditions, making it extremely valuable. Additionally, the demand for primordial spiritual liquid was extraordinarily high. Even warriors in the spirit path realm tried to cultivate with the aid of primordial spiritual liquid. Therefore, there were few warriors who were able to use primordial spiritual liquid in the entire Tianzong dynasty, let alone those in Sword Marquis Mansion. Although there was some primordial spiritual liquid in Sword Marquis Mansion, the effect on their warriors was insignificant due to the small amount. I know a place where there is a pond formed completely out of primordial spiritual liquid. Are you interested? Bai Chong gave Jian Wushuang a smile.
A pond.
Jian Wushuang was intrigued by this. A meager amount of primordial spiritual liquid would have little effect on promoting a warrior's cultivation, while an abundance of it would play a totally different role. A pond formed out of primordial spiritual liquid? How much was primordial spiritual liquid there? It's in a cave of a rift in the northern part of Nine Wolves Mountain, which is 15 kilometers away from the commandery city. But for a long time, it's been occupied by a bloody lion at the peak of rank 6. If you want to enter the cave, it is necessary to get rid of the bloody lion, Bai Chong said with a smile.
A rift in the north. Nine Wolves Mountain.
Jian Wushuang secretly bore it in mind and replied gratefully, Thank you, Sir Bai Chong. Please, you are welcome. Bai Chong waved at him. Jian Wushuang looked deep in his eyes and then turned away. After Jian Wushuang had gone, a golden-robed servant behind Bai Chong could not help saying, Supervisor, that pond is formed completely out of primordial spiritual liquid. With such abundant primordial spiritual liquid, its value is very high. The pond is so precious, not because of the primordial spiritual liquid, but the spiritual fruit at the bottom of the pond. The primordial spiritual liquid was formed due to the spiritual fruit. Bai Chong shook his head and laughed. Tell those people who go to the pond to only take the spiritual fruit away. Just ignore the primordial spiritual liquid and bloody lion.
Got it.
The golden-robed servant nodded. In the gladiator arena, the supervisor was so powerful that no one dared to violate his orders. By the way, will the annual sword marquee token battle be held next month?
Bai Chong again asked.
Yes, the golden-robed servant replied respectfully. Supervisor, you've been invited to the sword marquee mansion. Moreover, the new sword pavilion master will officially take office. I heard that the new sword pavilion master is Jian Menge, the most gifted youth in sword marquee mansion, who is less than 16 years old but has already reached the profound spiritual sea realm. She is also the daughter of Jian Lan, the great elder of Red Martial Hall.
Oh.
Bai Chong unfurrowed his brows. Haha, it seems that the sword marquee token battle will be very interesting this year. Now I am looking forward to it. The son of Jian Nantian. Tut, I want to see if he will surprise me as his father did. On the way back to Sword Marquee Mansion, Jian Wushuang kept thinking. The pond is formed completely out of primordial spiritual liquid, so it would be extremely valuable. Why did he tell me this information? It must be because of my father. Jian Wushuang guessed with some certainty. His father had told him that, due to his aloofness and pride, he had few friends. But Bai Chong was one of them. Obviously, Bai Chong recognized me, and as a friend of my father, he chose to tell me that. Whether he told me for the sake of my father or not, I am grateful for his kindness, Jian Wushuang thought secretly. In a pond that is formed completely out of primordial spiritual liquid, even average people would greatly benefit if they cultivated there, let alone I, who cultivates the heavenly creation skill. However, there is a bloody lion at the peak of rank 6, which is comparable to the peak of the 6th step of the spirit path for humans. Presently, I am not capable of fighting against it.
Take it slow.
I need to enhance my abilities first. Jian Wushuang clenched his hands firmly. In the earth-level cultivating room of Sword Pavilion, first-class spirit cultivating pills have amazing efficacy. Previously, I broke through the 4th heaven of the divine path from the 3rd heaven of the divine path after swallowing just one pill. Now, I have 11 first-class spirit cultivating pills. I really wonder to what extent my strength will reach after absorbing all 11 first-class spirit cultivating pills. Jian Wushuang sat cross-legged on the futon, with fervent eyes.
I am ready.
Without hesitation, Jian Wushuang opened the jade box and took one first-class spirit cultivating pill. After he took this elixir, heavenly creation skill functioned to quickly absorb that amazing energy. In the following days, Jian Wushuang still carried out his earnest cultivation. When compared to other skills, it took less time to cultivate heavenly creation skill. Furthermore, the cultivation speed increased due to its ability of rapid recovery and the assisting effects of the earth-level cultivating room. Meanwhile, Jian Wushuang freely ingested those first-class spirit cultivating pills, which countless cultivators of the spirit path coveted. All of that accelerated his cultivation to an incredible level. In the blink of an eye, half a month passed by. There was now only 1 month until the annual sword marquee token battle. That night, it showered. Jian Wushuang, who had continued to stay overnight inside the earth-level cultivating room, completely absorbed the efficacy of those pills inside his body. He then slowly opened his eyes, and there was a dormant, rumbling spiritual power within his body. As he abruptly clenched his hands, an explosive force erupted volcanically, as if a punch could cause the air to explode. Jian Wushuang's eyes were sparkling with a dazzling light. The 6th heaven of the divine path. Almost reaching the peak of the 6th heaven. Jian Wushuang was ecstatic. With his desperate cultivation over half a month, he had completely absorbed the energy from the 11 first-class spirit cultivating pills. After all, the efficacy of a first-class spirit cultivating pill was amazing. For average warriors, it took at least 1 month to thoroughly absorb one pill. However, he had absorbed 11 pills in a very short time, by virtue of the heavenly creation skill. As a result, his strength increased by leaps and bounds. It was a long way from the 4th heaven of the divine path to the 6th heaven of the divine path, almost to the peak of the 6th heaven of the divine path. Many people would have been startled had they known that he had cultivated at such an unbelievable speed. Because only 1 month ago, they knew that he was trash who could not condense spiritual power. You just wait and see, Jian Menge. I will startle you in 1 month. Jian Wushuang clenched his hands firmly, with an undiluted self-confidence in his eyes. Jian Wushuang walked out of the cultivating room and saw Elder Hong waiting outside. Seeing Jian Wushuang, Elder Hong could not refrain from showing astonishment. He felt that Jian Wushuang had changed a lot in terms of his strength. Jian Wushuang did not voluntarily release his aura of spiritual power, so Elder Hong could not figure out his exact cultivation. However, he knew that Jian Wushuang must have made great progress in the cultivation room. It seems that our young pavilion master has made big strides lately, Elder Hong said smiling.
Yeah.
Jian Wushuang nodded and asked, Elder Hong, what's the matter? Here's the thing, Elder Hong replied. The trial tower has opened again today. If you want to join the fight, you should try.
Trial tower?
Jian Wushuang was intrigued by this information. Trial Tower was a 7-story building made for testing cultivation and martial arts techniques. The higher the floor, the more difficult the test. It was usually closed, except for the month before the year-end battle each year. The Trial Tower test could be regarded as a preliminary battle. After all, the annual Sword Marquee Token Battle was the most significant event in Sword Marquee Mansion. Every year, the mansion would invite influential masters from within the Bahui Prefecture. To ensure a good performance for the masters, the participating disciples had to pass the Trial Tower in advance. At a minimum, only disciples who had reached the 5th story of the 7-story tower were qualified to participate in the battle. Therefore, Jian Wushuang had to pass this test in the Trial Tower if he wanted to participate in the battle. I am leaving for 9 Wolves Mountain soon, and I will stay there for 1 month. Since I have to get the entry qualification for the battle, I have to take this chance at the Trial Tower and pass the test first. Jian Wushuang thought to himself. It would be a piece of cake for him to pass the Trial Tower test. Once he made up his mind, Jian Wushuang went directly to the Trial Tower. Trial Tower stood erect in the very center of a huge courtyard. It was a gigantic tower, more than 33 meters high. At that moment, there were a lot of disciples in front of the huge tower. Look, the 6th gem has been lit. Cousin Jian Lin has passed the 6th story. Cousin Jian Lin is really awesome.
How would you know?
Cousin Jian Lin broke through the 6th step of the spirit path long ago. He has reached the peak of the 6th step. With his cultivation of spiritual power, it's a cinch for him to pass the 7th story, never mind the 6th story. Look, the 7th gem has already been lit. Several disciples stared at the 7 gems in front of the tower gate. Each gem corresponded to 1 story of the Trial Tower. After passing 1 story, a gem would be lit up. If all 7 gems were lit up, it meant that all 7 stories had been passed. It must have been that Jian Lin, who had reached the peak of the 6th step of the spirit path, was going to pass all 7 stories. Soon after, the tower gate opened once again. The cyan-clothed Jian Lin walked out slowly, with a confident smile. Noticing the envious glances from the surrounding disciples, he was extremely proud of himself. Jian Lin has passed the 7th story. He is qualified to participate in the Sword Marquee Token Battle. In front of the tower gate, an elder from Red Martial Hall wrote his name down rapidly, and then looked around saying next. Many disciples hesitated. It was hard to pass the Trial Tower test. If one wanted to pass the 5th story, he needed to have a spiritual power cultivation of the 5th step of spirit path. Moreover, if they wanted to take part in the battle, he had to be under 16. In the mansion, the number of disciples who could satisfy these 2 conditions was only modest. With so few qualifiers and so many bystanders, one would feel embarrassed if they took the test but then failed to even pass the 5th story. Let me have a try. As a voice rose, a young figure slowly came over. He had a long sword behind his back. Many disciples looked at him. They were astonished when they recognized him.
Is it him? Jian Wushuang.
Jian Wushuang of the Sword Pavilion, was he the one who just spoke? How could he possibly pass the Trial Tower test? Everyone was in disbelief. As the son of the last Sword Pavilion master, Jian Wushuang had a special identity. Furthermore, he was universally recognized as trash in the mansion, because he had not been able to gather spiritual power. Therefore, all the disciples in the mansion knew him. For this reason, they were extremely skeptical when he decided to attempt the test of the Trial Tower. In addition to the disciples, the note-keeping elder of Red Martial Hall could not help raising his head with surprise in his eyes, asking, "You want to take the test in Trial Tower?"
Can't I?
Jian Wushuang looked indifferent.
Of course you can.
As long as you are a disciple of the mansion under 16. The elder nodded, saying, "Please go in."
Thank you.
Jian Wushuang went directly into the tower, ignoring the multitude of eyes upon him. Just as he ascended the steps, a voice that was obviously unfriendly rose from the side. "Jian Wushuang, how dare you come here to take the test? You overestimate yourself." Jian Wushuang paused and glanced coldly at Jian Lin, who glared at him with contempt. Without a word, he continued to walk toward the Trial Tower. Soon, he was inside the tower. When he saw this, Jian Lin slightly turned the corner of his lips. Trash like you is so arrogant. Wait and see, you will be embarrassed later. Cousin Jian Lin, do you think Jian Wushuang can pass the 5th story? A disciple of Red Marshal Hall asked.
Him.
Jian Lin responded with a sneer. To pass the 5th story, one must have a cultivation of the 5th step of spirit path. He reached the 3rd step of spirit path more than half a month ago. Now, he might have reached the 4th step of spirit path at most. Even if he is the son of the last sword pavilion master and possesses outstanding swordsmanship, it is still idiotic nonsense for him to pass the 5th story with a cultivation of the 4th step of the spirit path. The surrounding people all agreed with him. More than half a month ago, he had just reached the 3rd step of the spirit path. How strong could he be now? He might have reached the 4th step of the spirit path at most. How could he possibly pass the 5th story in the trial tower?
What a joke.
Humph, he is asking for grief. Jian Lin sneered. He expected that Jian Wushuang would disgrace himself in front of everyone. On the 1st floor of Trial Tower. Looking at those 3 tall figures standing in front of him, Jian Wushuang knew they were humanoid puppets, which were unique to Trial Tower. They were opponents that he needed to confront. Trial Tower, a place where cultivation and martial arts techniques are assessed. In general, anyone whose cultivation reaches the 6th step will complete 7 levels in total. Even those who have outstanding martial arts techniques at the peak of the 5th step may get to the 7th level as well. Therefore, I am curious about how far I can go using only my swordsmanship and not using any spiritual power. Jian Wushuang thought secretly.
I am ready.
After saying that, Jian Wushuang waved the long sword in his hand. Wow, instantly, condensed sword essence directly erupted like roaring waves.
Sword Tide.
Jian Wushuang yelled with wildness in his eyes. Sword Tide was a deadly move from a first-class sword art, ceaseless waterflow sword art. And it was wielded at its best by Jian Wushuang. After some simple movements, a sword shadow swept over the room. Those 3 humanoid puppets instantly fought back. However, being at the entrance level, they were much weaker than Jian Wushuang. Even if Jian Wushuang did not use his spiritual power, he could defeat them easily with only his quick and forceful swordsmanship.
The 1st level passed.
Outside Trial Tower, the 1st gem lit up, which meant that he made it through the 1st level. The disciples around it did not feel surprised.
Humph.
Only the 1st level. With his cultivation in the 3rd step of spirit path, he should easily pass through the first 3 floors. And completing the 4th level is also possible. However, it is an idiot's daydream to think that he will complete the 5th level. Jian Lin's face was still full of contempt. Not long after the 1st gem had lit up, the 2nd one lit up and soon after, the 3rd one followed. All intervals were short, which meant that it did not take Jian Wushuang too much time to defeat those humanoid puppets on each floor. However, it was only after a long interval that the 4th one lit up. He stayed on the 4th floor for a long time, so he obviously spent a lot of time battling hard with the humanoid puppets there. As for the 5th floor, the humanoid puppets are much stronger than the ones downstairs. There is no chance for him to win. The 4th level must be his limit.
Haha, I knew it.
Trash like him, how can he pass through the 5th level of Trial Tower? Many disciples around sneered and booed. They thought Jian Wushuang had given his all to make it through the 4th level. Otherwise, why would he have been held up for such a long time? Jian Lin especially sneered again and again, smiling sardonically, and could not wait to make fun of Jian Wushuang when he walked out of Trial Tower. On the 5th floor of Trial Tower, Jian Wushuang's face appeared was grim. After each level, the strength of the humanoid puppets greatly increase. I easily completed the first 3 levels with swordsmanship only. However, on the 4th level, I went through a tough battle and it took a long time to defeat them. Therefore, on the 5th floor, it will be impossible to defeat them with swordsmanship alone. Let me use spiritual power. Jian Wushuang stretched the sides of his mouth upward, then spiritual power burst forth in a flash. If disciples outside Trial Tower knew that Jian Wushuang completed the first 4 levels with only his swordsmanship, it would have scared the pants off of them. In general, a warrior who wanted to pass the 4th level of Trial Tower at least needed to be in the 4th step of the spirit path. However, he had gotten through it without using spiritual power. In other words, his martial arts technique was well matched with cultivation of warriors in the 4th step of the spirit path.
It was incredible.
Once his spiritual power, which was nearly at the peak of the 6th heaven of divine path, burst out, it was much easier for Jian Wushuang to fight against those humanoid puppets. The disciples outside Trial Tower, including Jian Lin, were waiting to see how Jian Wushuang would bring shame upon himself.
But just then,
the 5th gem by the door of Trial Tower lit up. Upon seeing that, the disciples were suddenly astonished. It meant that Jian Wushuang had gotten through the 5th level.
How could this be? Impossible.
He took such a long time on the 4th level. Clearly, he completed that with great difficulty. So, how could he get through the 5th level? Does this mean that Trash has reached the 5th step of the spirit path in his cultivation? All of their faces were full of disbelief and astonishment. Jian Lin was even more astonished with a wide-open mouth but did not know what to say. However, that was just the beginning. Before they could react, the 6th gem lit up. The 6th level. Having seen that, all of the disciples who were gathered there held their breath for a second. Then, after less than 15 minutes, the last one also lit up instantly. All 7 gems, each embodying one floor of Trial Tower, had lit up. It meant that Jian Wushuang had completed all of them. Silence. Outside was deathly silent. All the people on site looked at those 7 sparkling gems in disbelief. They had never been in such a state of shock before. The 7th level. He made it through the 7th level? Jian Lin was dumbstruck. Actually, he swore that Jian Wushuang was, at most, only at the 4th step of the spirit path before he had gone into Trial Tower. To scrape by the 4th level was lucky for him. There was no chance for him to make it through the 5th level. But what was the reality? The 5th level? Jian Wushuang had not only passed through the 5th floor, but he also passed through the 6th and the 7th. He had passed through all 7 floors of Trial Tower. Now, he was as strong as him. Impossible. This is by no means possible. Jian Lin shook his head fiercely. He could never believe that this had happened. While all of them were in shock, they did not notice that Jian Wushuang had walked out of the Trial Tower door. Shua. In a flash, all eyes turned toward him, making him the focal point on the field. Even the elder from Red Marshal Hall who was in charge of recording the results was now staring at Jian Wushuang in utter surprise. Am I qualified to enter the Sword Marquee token battle in 1 month? Jian Wushuang looked at the elder and asked. The elder was startled for a second. Then he returned to himself, nodded and said, Jian Wushuang has completed the 7th level. Qualified. Jian Wushuang nodded with satisfaction. However, the people around him burst into a heated discussion. The 7th level. How could it be possible? How could Jian Wushuang get past the 7th floor? It generally requires a warrior whose cultivation reaches the 6th step of spirit path to complete it. However, Jian Wushuang, he could not condense any spiritual power just 1 month ago, could he? No. His cultivation could not be that strong. His swordsmanship must have been what helped him. Yes. That is right. I will never believe that a person without any spiritual power could reach the 6th step of spirit path in just 1 month. Many disciples were denigrating him. Jian Wushuang. A somber voice called out. Before he could react, a figure stood in front of Jian Wushuang. It was Jian Lin. He was so angry that his face was twisted. Jian Lin stared at Jian Wushuang coldly, while the latter looked at him indifferently. Jian Wushuang, it seems that I have always looked down upon you. I never expected that you had hidden yourself so deeply. Everyone thought you were trash who could not condense any spiritual power. But now it appears you could condense spiritual power long ago, and your cultivation is not bad. You have just hidden your power and were unwilling to expose it. Jian Lin's voice was as cold as a knife. About half a month ago, you exposed your cultivation at the 3rd step of spirit path in front of me. You faked that, didn't you? Pretend? Does he think I hid my strength for 4 years? Jian Wushuang sneered inwardly but did not give an answer. Jian Lin and the surrounding disciples could think what they liked. It didn't matter if they thought he had hidden his strength all this time or something similar. He did not mind at all. In the Sword Marquee Mansion, what he really cared about was one person, Jian Mengge. Jian Wushuang's indifference, even disregard, made Jian Lin even angrier. Jian Wushuang, I have passed the 7th level of the Trial Tower before. Now you have made it too, so do you dare to fight with me? Jian Lin said directly. Fight with you in public? Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows and looked at him. What? You don't dare? The corner of Jian Lin's mouth turned up slightly, with a hint of disdain. Jian Lin, I am very curious. There are many disciples in the Sword Marquee Mansion. Why do you always target me? If you envy me because of Jian Mengge, well, now I am done with her. Why do you still bother me? Is your mind so narrow? Jian Wushuang asked with disdain. His guess was correct. Jian Lin was narrow-minded, and he was filled with jealousy. As Jian Wushuang had spent so much time with Jian Mengge in the past, this caused Jian Lin's resentment toward him to reach its limit. Even though the relationship between them was now over, his resentment hadn't faded at all. Enough talk. I am just asking whether you dare to fight me. Jian Lin stared at Jian Wushuang firmly. Hearing these words, Jian Wushuang's mouth tilted slightly. He took a deep breath and raised his head again. His eyes flashed with a hint of relief. Well, I promise you, if you want to fight, then we will fight. There was a stir throughout the whole Trial Tower. Accepted the challenge. He accepted the challenge. How dare he accept it? Why wouldn't he? After all, he has passed the 7th level of the trial tower. Maybe his cultivation of spiritual power has reached the 6th step, too. Wait. They both passed the 7th level of the trial tower. Brother Jian Lin's cultivation reached the peak of the 6th step long ago. Obviously, Jian Wushuang has been hiding his cultivation level this whole time. Their fight will be very interesting. Disciples surrounding them, looking forward to the fight. You have got guts. Jian Lin grinned hideously, but he didn't look Jian Wushuang in the eye at all. Even if he had passed the 7th level of the trial tower, it would not make any difference. Everyone knew that any disciple whose cultivation had reached the 6th step could pass the 7th level easily. As for him, he had reached the peak of the 6th step long ago. Take this. Jian Lin roared loudly and stamped his foot. He was so powerful that a crack appeared in the floor and boundless spiritual power poured out like a flood. Using his spiritual power, his right hand was clenched into a fist. Immediately he threw a punch with vast power, raising a fierce wind around him. His cultivation at the peak of the 6th step of the spirit path burst out instantly. Many disciples present kept their eyes open. Although the fist was not aimed at them, they still could feel its tremendous force. Facing the full outburst of Jian Lin's power, Jian Wushuang kept his eyes cold and sharp. His spiritual power poured out slowly. The 6th step. It really is the 6th step. As soon as Jian Wushuang's spiritual power was revealed, many disciples around him knew his true cultivation immediately. Although they were both at the 6th step, there were some differences. Get out of my way. An angry roar sounded out like a thunderbolt. Jian Wushuang struck with all his power. Haha, you dare fight me without drawing your sword. How stupid. Jian Lin could not help laughing. Everyone knew that Jian Lin was at the peak of the 6th step of the spirit path. Watching Jian Wushuang's reaction, it was obvious that he was uncertain if he could battle this level. Under the circumstances, he would be at an absolute disadvantage if he confronted Jian Lin directly. Bang! 2 spiritual power fists finally crashed together. The 2 fists containing hidden power exploded out at the same time. What? When Jian Lin's fist slammed into Jian Wushuang's, his face changed, because he felt the frightening power from Jian Wushuang's fist. This power was apparently stronger than his. How is this possible? He hasn't reached the peak of the 6th step. Jian Lin roared in his heart. With a heart filled with astonishment and anger, Jian Lin felt a burst of sharp pain. He groaned slightly, and blood spilt from his mouth. He retreated back 10 steps, and every step was so heavy and forceful that he left deep tracks on the floor. However, Jian Wushuang did not retreat even 1 step. Outclassed. Jian Wushuang totally surpassed Jian Lin in power. Many disciples were shocked. No one had thought the competition in pure force would turn out like this. One who obviously had not reached the peak of the 6th step should not have outclassed Jian Lin, who was at the peak of the same realm. However, they did not know that Jian Wushuang cultivated the heavenly creation skill. It defied the natural order, and the spiritual power warriors could release was much stronger than warriors following other forms of cultivations. Although Jian Wushuang had not reached the peak of the 6th heaven of divine path, the spiritual power he was capable of unleashing was stronger than other warriors at the peak of the 6th step of the spirit path. In this competition, totally focused on strength, Jian Wushuang completely outclassed Jian Lin. I cannot believe it. A flash of insanity appeared in Jian Lin's eyes. He was repelled by Jian Wushuang. He groaned and then rushed toward Jian Wushuang. He stretched out his right hand. A tiger's roar erupted suddenly between heaven and earth. Then, a giant tiger began to gradually form from the convergence of his power. After completely materializing, the giant tiger charged at Jian Wushuang like lightning. Its tiger-roaring fist. Brother Jian Lin is using a martial arts technique and he is using his most powerful one. That giant tiger was totally condensed by spiritual power. This movement costs vast spiritual power, but it is really strong. Look, Jian Wushuang is drawing his sword. The movement of the sword. Chuu. The cold sword light was shining, and then it vanished immediately. Time seemed to stop completely for a moment. In front of the shocked audience, the aggressive giant tiger was split into 2. Cho! The sound of a sword edge piercing into the body rang out. A smear of blood splashed across Jian Lin's shoulder. Outside the trial tower, all was silent. No sound was heard except for the subtle sound of Jian Wushuang's long sword sliding back into its sheath. Ignoring the great shock in the eyes all around him, Jian Wushuang slowly turned away to leave. But before going, he stopped to glance at Jian Lin and said coldly, "This time I only chopped into your shoulder. But if there is a next time, I will chop off your head." Hearing this, Jian Lin was shocked and humiliated, feeling ashamed and resentful. And the disciples of Marquis Mansion did not recover from their surprise until Jian Wushuang had completely disappeared from their sight. Then, everyone present could not stop talking about what had happened. Brother Jian Lin was defeated.
How could this happen? One move. Only one move.
There is quite a big disparity in strength. Not only in their spiritual powers, but the disparity between their martial arts techniques is even greater.
And it was.
Jian Wushuang surpassed Jian Lin in explosive spiritual power. And as for martial arts technique, it should be known that Jian Menge, whose attainments in swordsmanship were marvelous, was regarded as the first genius in the Sword Marquis Mansion. But her swordsmanship was taught to her by Jian Wushuang. Even Jian Menge herself knew that she was not qualified to compete with Jian Wushuang in martial arts technique. In the entire Sword Marquis Mansion, it seemed that there was no one better than Jian Wushuang in martial arts technique. Because of the great disparity in their martial arts techniques, Jian Wushuang had defeated Jian Lin with only one move and had hurt his shoulder. If Jian Wushuang had wanted to, he could have killed Jian Lin just now. The news that Jian Wushuang had passed the 7th level of the trial tower and defeated Jian Lin with one move swept over Sword Marquis Mansion like a hurricane. Suddenly, the Sword Marquis Mansion was in total shock. Naturally, the news also came to Jian Menge at once. Menge, something happened in the Marquis' mansion today. It was Jian Lan, the father of Jian Menge, who told her the news. Jian Wushuang had consolidated spiritual power and become a warrior. Moreover, his cultivation had reached the 6th step of the spirit path. Today, he passed the 7th level of the trial tower and defeated Jian Lin with only one move.
Oh!
Even Jian Menge felt quite astonished upon hearing that. Before our friendship broke up, he often said that he would be a real warrior soon. At that time, I thought he was just comforting himself. But now it seems that he wasn't. After being a little astonished, she slightly smiled and obviously did not take it seriously. Menge, I'm afraid that you should attach some importance to this, Jian Lan said seriously. Though many people in the Marquis' mansion thought that Jian Wushuang had been concealing his strength, you and I know that there was indeed no spiritual power in his body just 1 month ago. During the last 4 years, Jian Menge was together with Jian Wushuang all the time. No one knew him better than they did. In only 1 month, he went from an ordinary man without any spiritual power to a warrior of the 6th step of the spirit path and defeated Jian Lin so easily. What terrifying progress he has made, Jian Lan said.
So he has.
Jian Menge nodded in agreement. But so what? Jian Lan was stunned for a second. Father, you're worrying that he will be a powerful opponent in the battle next month, aren't you?
Jian Menge asked. Jian Lan nodded.
Jian Wushuang had taken a blood oath that he would compete against Jian Menge in the battle. That news spread throughout Sword Marquis Mansion. At first, none of them took it seriously. But now they changed their minds. If Jian Wushuang defeated Jian Menge in front of all the people of Sword Marquis Mansion and the other strong experts present, she would fail to be the Sword Pavilion Master. Furthermore, she and her father would be laughed at by everyone. Jian Menge, universally acknowledged as the top genius in Sword Marquis Mansion, was completely surpassed by someone within 2 months. Was that not a big joke? Father, you worry too much. Jian Menge did not care about it at all and said, it's normal that Jian Wushuang could eventually consolidate spiritual power and make normal progress after practicing for 4 years. Although he could go from an ordinary man to reaching the 6th step of the spirit path within 1 month, he won't be able to reach the 7th step of the spirit path by next month.
What do you think, father?
Reach the 7th step in 1 month? Jian Lan was stupefied for a moment and then shook his head firmly and resolutely.
Impossible.
Absolutely impossible. There is a great disparity between the 6th and 7th steps of the spirit path. Even a genius in cultivation like you spent a full half-year advancing from the 6th step to the 7th step of the spirit path. Moreover, you couldn't have succeeded without the assistance of lots of elixirs and some natural treasures, let alone an ordinary person. Therefore, no matter how fast Jian Wushuang cultivates, he can't reach the 7th step of the spirit path in 1 month. Jian Lan said resolutely and decisively. And indeed, that was true. A great disparity did exist between the 6th step of the spirit path and the 7th step of the spirit path. To make a breakthrough within 1 month was definitely wishful thinking. Yes, it's almost impossible. Besides, even if he did succeed, what could he do? Jian Menge said disdainfully. Hearing what Jian Menge had said, Jian Lan relaxed the frown on his face and then smiled. Indeed, regardless of whether or not Jian Wushuang could reach the 7th step of the spirit path in a month, he could do nothing even if he did make it. Presently, Jian Menge possessed cultivation at the profound spiritual sea realm. No matter how extraordinary Jian Wushuang was in swordsmanship, he could not compete with Jian Menge unless he was in the spiritual sea realm. Maybe I am overthinking this. Jian Wushuang can't threaten you. Jian Lan smiled in relief.
Don't talk about him.
Tell me about the master behind you. Is there any reply to the message? I have gotten a reply, Jian Menger answered with expectation. Great Master said that she would present herself at the battle in 1 month to witness me becoming the new sword pavilion master.
Haha, that's great.
If she could present herself at the battle, you would no doubt be the winner. Hearing the good news, Jian Lan felt very delighted. In the sword pavilion, the 4 great elders, headed by Elder Hong, were gathered.
Haha.
Young pavilion master passed the 7th level and defeated Jian Lin with 1 move.
That's awesome.
It's amazing that the young pavilion master could have made such rapid progress in such a short period of time, isn't it? If the young pavilion master keeps improving at such a speed, he is likely to defeat Jian Menger in the battle next month. Having heard the good news, these elders were all talking and laughing. Elder brother, we concealed that matter from the young pavilion master because he was previously not even a warrior. But now, should we tell him about it? Another elder suddenly asked. No hurry, Elder Hong shook his head and said, it's too early. We should tell him a bit later. By the way, I'm going to write a letter and send it to the master in the Golden Dragon Palace. He will be glad to know that the young pavilion master has made such rapid progress. The whole Sword Marquee Mansion was shocked by the battle between Jian Wushuang and Jian Lin. However, Jian Wushuang, the hero of the battle, did not care about it at all. After getting permission to join in the battle, he directly left for 9 Wolves Mountain. Jian Wushuang was very eager to get to the pond full of primordial spiritual liquid. 9 Wolves Mountain was 15 kilometers away from the county and it took Jian Wushuang half a day to get there. He spent a long time trying to find the cave in the north rift of the mountain. It's that cave. Standing at the top of a big tree, Jian Wushuang could see a cave at the bottom of the rift. Not far from the cave was a huge monster. Its breathing sounded rhythmically from its nose.
Is that a bloody lion?
Jian Wushuang stared at the huge monster, unable to look away. Bai Chong had mentioned that the cave with primordial spiritual liquid was the territory of a bloody lion at the peak of the 6th realm. A monster at the peak of that realm could match a warrior at the peak of the 6th step of spirit path. Some spirit beasts had innate advantages, so when they battled human beings, they were stronger. The spirit beasts are born to hate human beings, and their territorial awareness is extremely strong. If I want to get into that cave, I have no choice but to kill the bloody lion.
So let's fight.
Jian Wushuang's eyes were like lightning. Like an eagle preying on its food, he leapt down from the treetop. Long sword on his back was unsheathed at the same time. The sound of his sword echoed in the rift, as Jian Wushuang rushed violently towards the bloody lion.
Bloody lion.
Jian Wushuang's eyes were full of battle intent.
Human being.
Bloody lion woke up with a start and a pair of dark gold eyes burst out with cold killing intent. With an angry roar, it charged ferociously at Jian Wushuang. The battle surprisingly finished in just an instant. Jian Wushuang sheathed his bloody long sword and looked at bloody lion on the ground. Blood oozed from the deep sword scar in its neck. Many sword scars of different sizes were spread all over its body. It was dead now. According to convention, at the peak of the 6th realm, the bloody lion was powerful enough to defeat human beings at peak of the 6th step of the spirit path. However, this was only the case with normal human warriors. Once it encountered human warriors who mastered excellent martial arts techniques, not only could it not defeat them, it would be totally defeated by them. Jian Wushuang's swordsmanship could overwhelm the whole Sword Marquee Mansion, so killing a bloody lion was rather easy. Ignoring the bloody lion's corpse, Jian Wushuang stepped into the cave. It was deep, and its path was very narrow. However, when he went through the small entranceway, he found it was quite different from the outside. The interior of the cave was quite refined. There was a stone table, bench, and bed. It appeared that someone had once lived here. As he entered further into the cave, he found that the pond emitted a faint scent. The diameter of the pond was 3 meters or less. It belonged to a small creature. However, as soon as Jian Wushuang noticed the pond, his eyes were full of wild excitement. Primordial spiritual liquid. Jian Wushuang looked at the fragrant, and nearly transparent, water in the pond eagerly. He could feel the pure power contained in the water. There was no doubt this pond water truly was the invaluable primordial spiritual liquid.
The whole pond. Jian Wushuang jumped into the pond.
The moment he entered the pond, he found that although it was not long in diameter, it was very deep, at least 10 meters.
Such a large pond.
All this water is primordial spiritual liquid. I wonder how much there is? Jian Wushuang thought in excitement. Primordial spiritual liquid was the purest spiritual liquid. It contained almost no impurities. For warriors following the spirit path, it was much stronger than spirit cultivating pills. Primordial spiritual liquid formed naturally, so very few people could use large quantities of it to improve their cultivation. But now there was a whole pond. If the water was divided into drops, how many would it be? What would the value be? No doubt it was very high. Sir Bai Chong has given me such an amazing opportunity. Trembling slightly with anticipation, Jian Wushuang was extremely grateful. Without hesitation, Jian Wushuang began to cultivate in the pond. By cultivating in the pond, he could absorb the primordial spiritual liquid surrounding him and turn it into spiritual power. For an ordinary warrior, it would take a considerable amount of time to absorb all the primordial spiritual liquid in the pond, but Jian Wushuang was different. Heavenly creation skill greatly defied the natural order. The first-class spirit cultivating pill he'd taken earlier contained such toxicity that it would take ordinary warriors 1 or 2 months to absorb it. However, Jian Wushuang had completely absorbed the pill in just 1 night. It was the same with the primordial spiritual liquid. As Jian Wushuang started to practice heavenly creation skill, the power of his cultivation method immediately manifested itself. An overbearing power was erupting out from his body, forcefully absorbing everything nearby. The primordial spiritual liquid in the pond was the first to be absorbed. It flooded into Jian Wushuang's pores at an amazing speed. It was like a huge black hole, consuming everything, crazy and overwhelming. How horrifying was the absorption speed! As primordial spiritual liquid flooded into his body, it was changed into spiritual power, by using the heavenly creation skill. With this process of absorption and change, the steadily increasing speed of his spiritual power could be regarded as terrifying.
It is too fast.
The increase of my spiritual power is too fast and terrifying. Jian Wushuang was shocked at himself. His mind was muddled, and he could not believe it. Because the speed was too frightening. In fact, all this was natural. Primordial spiritual liquid combined with heavenly creation skill, which defied the heavens, was truly overwhelming and terrifying. Just like the first-class spirit cultivating pill he'd taken before, for warriors, primordial spiritual liquid's function was much stronger than spirit cultivating pills. The pond's primordial spiritual liquid was equal to 10 first-class spirit cultivating pills. Therefore, the increasing speed of his spiritual power was naturally beyond imagination. In just half a day, Jian Wushuang found his spiritual power had reached peak of the 6th heaven of divine path. It had only taken half a day. It seemed that the pond had not reduced much in primordial spiritual liquid from this half-day of absorption. Over the next few days, Jian Wushuang focused fully on cultivating and didn't tell anyone about the terrifying improvement of his strength. Time seemed to pass slowly, yet 20 days went by in the blink of an eye.
In the pond,
the water level was decreasing. Jian Wushuang remained in the pond, as some primordial spiritual liquid was still flowing into his body. Finally, as the last drop of primordial spiritual liquid was absorbed, the huge pond had disappeared completely. Jian Wushuang, who had been indulging in his cultivation, suddenly opened his eyes. A terrifying flash burst out from his eyes. From the bottom of the pond, Jian Wushuang stood up slowly. All his muscles and joints crackled as he rose. He stretched and took a great leap to the entrance of the cave. Jian Wushuang looked at the wall of the mountain ahead of him with his sparkling eyes. A sudden clenching of his right hand made an explosive force burst out instantly from the mountain. Bang! The tremendous sound echoed through the cave. Jian Wushuang looked at the large hole in the wall in front of him. His eyes were bright. Not only did I reach the 8th heaven of divine path, I reached the peak. Clenching his fists in excitement, he could feel the surging power contained in his hands. Jian Wushuang had spent 20 days cultivating in this cave, absorbing every drop of primordial spiritual liquid from the pond. It had contained a huge quantity of pure spiritual power, which he had absorbed completely and transformed into spiritual power. As a result, his strength had improved to an amazing state. Not long ago he had been at the 6th heaven of divine path, close to the peak. But today, a series of breakthroughs had brought him to the 7th heaven of divine path, then the 8th heaven of divine path. He had skyrocketed to the peak of the 8th heaven of divine path. It was an explosive breakthrough. But everything happened in a systematic manner. After all, not everyone had access to such a vast amount of primordial spiritual liquid to help with his cultivation, let alone heavenly creation skill, heaven-defying cultivation method. His marvelous breakthrough was attributed to the primordial spiritual liquid and the heavenly creation skill. The 8th heaven of divine path was equivalent to the initial spiritual sea realm for an ordinary warrior. One who reached the peak of the 8th heaven of divine path had the same power as one at the peak of the initial spiritual sea realm. So spiritual power operated with the strength advantage of heavenly creation skill could be equivalent to the profound spiritual sea realm. Perhaps it was slightly lower, but not by much. A stunning light burst out from Jian Wushuang's eyes. "Jian Menge, I am gaining on you," Jian Wushuang roared. Jian Wushuang had cultivated to the profound spiritual sea realm. Although he had not solidified his cultivation, he had his heaven-defying heavenly creation skill, spiritual power, and so on. It meant that compared with Jian Wushuang, he was almost as strong as her. He had only needed 2 months to catch up to her.
10 days.
There are still 10 days before the battle. With his eyes squinting, Jian Wushuang thought, I should take my time. I have gained battle strength similar to the profound spiritual sea realm and have a great chance of defeating Jian Wushuang in battle. However, I still need to prepare a certain trump card for myself, just in case. Thinking about a trump card, the first thing that came to his mind was the secret skill recorded in Heavenly Creation Skill. Soul-devouring secret skill. It was an extremely powerful secret skill that defied the heavens. Along with Heavenly Creation Skill, he was deeply impressed with this secret skill. It was impossible to forget. When Jian Wushuang thought about this secret skill, he was shocked. It was so powerful that he thought it harmed natural harmony. Furthermore, it inflicted damage on the person who exercised it. Nobody was willing to use it unless it was really an emergency. It did not make sense to use such a secret skill as the trump card. Soul-devouring secret skill contains 3 scrolls. In my present realm, I can only try the first one at most. I can't even consider the second and third one right now. With a smile, Jian Wushuang started studying this skill. It took him a total of 5 days. 5 days later, Jian Wushuang was in the north rift of Nine Wolves Mountain, sitting cross-legged in a glade.
Let's do it.
He took a deep breath and started practicing soul-devouring secret skill. He spent 5 days studying. He was able to grasp the first scroll of the skill, but it had taken a considerable amount of time to carry out. He knew well the harm the skill could cause him, so he was very careful when putting it to use. He didn't dare to be sloppy. The secret skill, it devours one's soul. As he cultivated the secret skill, there was a buzzing sound.
It even shocked the void.
Jian Wushuang's body seemed like a giant black hole, into which there were constant peculiar forces flooding in at an amazing speed. These forces were so complex and diverse that Jian Wushuang had difficulty identifying them. But he found that with the infusion of these forces, his cultivation was booming. He had already been at the 8th heaven of divine path before, but this wild infusion of forces pushed his cultivation to a higher level. A single moment was enough to make a breakthrough from the 8th heaven, the 9th heaven of the divine path. His power continued to rise even after he reached the 9th heaven of the divine path. Suddenly, there was a sharp surge of pain in his heart. It became more intense with the rise of his cultivation. Stop it now. Jian Wushuang was clenching his teeth. His face was distorted. Feeling the sharp pain, he stopped the operation promptly. As soon as the secret skill stopped, his increasing cultivation ceased. The pain began to weaken. Even so, the spasms in his body did not diminish right away. Lying on the glade, Jian Wushuang closed his eyes. He was gasping for breath and looked very weak. It was a long time before he opened his eyes. Soul-devouring secret skill, it really is a secret skill that devours the soul? Jian Wushuang couldn't help shaking his head.
It really hurt.
It was harmful to practice this skill. He had spared some effort, because he didn't push his cultivation to its full extent. However, he still felt extreme pain. If he had exercised it to the full degree, it would be more painful. The soul-devouring secret skill really causes a surge in my cultivation in a short time, but it hurts me even more, Jian Wushuang said to himself. It was one's essence, qi and spirit, rather than their spiritual power, that the soul-devouring secret skill harmed. If it only consumed large quantities of spiritual power, he would not care at all. Heavenly Creation Skill, after all, helped him to recover spiritual power quickly. As for the essence, qi and spirit, however, even Heavenly Creation Skill could make no difference. Jian Wushuang shook his head and looked up.
He wore a weird expression. It's...
Jian Wushuang stared at everything around him in amazement. He realized the earth within dozens of meters around him had become lifeless. The earth, which had been dark green before, was now yellow and full of cracks. The flowers, grass, and trees were withering away. The ground with dozens of meters around him had died in the twinkling of an eye. With his eyes wide open, Jian Wushuang stared at his surroundings in wonder, a dozen-meter radius where the earth was a lifeless land of death. Further away from the circle, the land was green and vibrant. It was at this exact moment that Jian Wushuang understood how the soul-devouring secret skill had been named. It devoured the soul. What was soul-devouring? The skill would take the soul of the earth, creatures, and nature. He understood what the strange and intricate power flowing into his body just now had been. It had been the natural power of the nearby creatures. The soul-devouring secret skill worked by taking the power of all living beings within reach and keeping them for his own use. This skill really is horrible. Unless it is absolutely necessary, I will never use it again. Jian Wushuang warned himself. After this first taste, Jian Wushuang dared not to try it again. Instead, he continued to study the detailed steps of carrying out the skill. 3 days later, Jian Wushuang was in the creek in the very middle of Nine Wolves Mountain. He cupped his hands to drink from the creek and then stood up. It is the end of the month, and I am only 2 days away from the battle. It is time to go back now. Jian Wushuang looked at the endless sky above him. He smiled and jumped up into the air, then headed in the direction of Sword Marquee Mansion. In the early morning, dawn was just breaking. In Sword Marquee Mansion, when the first blush of the rising sun from the far horizon began to light the earth, everyone fell into an uproar. The disciples and tribesmen of the mansion poured out from each building and gathered in the drill ground at the center of the Marquis's mansion. Each party and tribe of the whole Bahui Commandery, as well as those from Sword Marquee Mansion, had dispatched their experts to Sword Marquee Mansion. Today, the annual Sword Marquee Token Battle was being held in the mansion. Actually, the so-called Sword Marquee Token was only a title for the strongest person among the youth. An expert would grow up and eventually advance, so the Sword Marquee Mansion attached great importance to the cultivation of young disciples. Every year, Sword Marquee Mansion invited all the parties and tribes of the commandery to watch the battle. Under normal circumstances, an invitation from Sword Marquee Mansion, the top most recognized power in Bahui Commandery, would not be refused by any party. This year was no exception. The Sword Marquee Token Battle was of special significance, especially this year. It was universally acknowledged in Bahui Commandery that there was a rare super genius in Sword Marquee Mansion. This super genius was only 16 and had already reached the profound spiritual sea realm. What's more, her swordsmanship was unfathomable. Such a young girl was going to take charge of the sword pavilion, which enjoyed a significant position in the mansion. Her deeds made every prominent persons in Bahui Commandery full of curiosity and expectation. And this exceptional genius was of course Jian Meng'e, the god's chosen daughter in the Sword Marquee Mansion. It was the perfect time for Jian Meng'e to flex her muscle in front of all the experts and to shoot for fame. After today, the sword pavilion would officially be in Jian Meng'e's charge. She would be the one crowned in the mansion. A great number of people had already swarmed into the wide drill ground.
There were 2 platforms.
One was used as the ring for disciples to show their strength, while the other one was the stands for the audience. Jian Xinhong, the current Sword Marquee Mansion master, was seated in a chair, having a casual conversation with several great personages who sat by him. Since these people could sit side by side with a mansion master, one could infer that their background was not normal. Look. That must be Situ Qingyue, the master of tribe Situ. That's Yi Xiao, the master of tribe Yi. Their family also focuses on swordsmanship. However, compared with our Sword Marquee Mansion, they are far worse. It is unexpected that this Sir Bai Chong, the mysterious supervisor of the gladiator arena, would come. A lot of disciples of the mansion were carefully discussing many things around the drill ground. They fixed their eyes on the stands from time to time to have a good look at these famous experts whom they seldom saw. The Situ and Yi tribes enjoyed a little less power and position than Sword Marquee Mansion, but the gap was narrow. As for the gladiator arena, it boasted great strength. In addition, the arena held an aloof position and didn't participate in the conflicts. Even the mansion master, Jian Xinhong, was wary of Bai Chong. Mr. Bai Chong, it is really a surprise that you have come to the Sword Marquee Token Battle personally this year. In recent years, you often sent a gold-robed servant from the gladiator arena on your behalf, said Situ Qingyue, while wearing a smile. It is a great honor for me and the mansion that Mr. Bai Chong has chosen to participate in this battle in person, said Jian Xinhong. This battle is much different from those before. It is normal that I should come in person. I am also curious about this exceptional genius and want to see exactly how talented she is, Bai Chong replied with a smile. Trust me, she won't let you down. Jian Xinhong said and laughed, showing his confidence in Jian Meng'e. Really? Bai Chong lifted his eyebrows. He laughed uncannily but didn't say anything more. Looking around the drill ground, he immediately noticed Jian Wushuang in a corner. He was leaning against the wall with his eyes closed. Bai Chong could not help smiling. The little boy is so calm. I wonder whether his strength has improved since the journey through Nine Wolves Mountain. Bai Chong was quite concerned for Jian Wushuang because of his friendship with Jian Nantian. He had provided Jian Wushuang with the opportunity to gain a whole pond of primordial spiritual liquid. His consideration for Jian Wushuang could be seen from what he had done. He had come mostly because of Jian Wushuang.
It's almost time.
Let's start, Jian Xinhong said on the platform. Jian Lan, who stood close to Jian Xinhong, nodded his head gently. Then he took a few steps and came to the very center of the platform. He cleared his throat and said, "Attention! Would all of the disciples participating in this battle please come up?" As the great elder of the Redley Martial Hall, Jian Lan was supposed to host the Sword Marquee token battle this time. There was a disturbance in the drill ground. The young disciples who had acquired their position in the battle by getting through the 5th level of the trial tower went to the center of the ground. They hustled and bustled. There were a good dozen young disciples at first sight, all of whom were geniuses in the Sword Marquee mansion, including Jian Wushuang. At the same time, a beautiful white figure was walking slowly towards them. Suddenly, everyone on the drill ground gave their full attention to her. Not only the disciples on the ground, even the personages on the platform turned their gaze to this white figure. As the god's chosen daughter in Sword Marquee Mansion, disciples in the mansion adored Jian Menger as if she was a goddess. She was so beautiful, along with her cultivation and even her gift in sword principle. She had one great admiration. Jian Menger stepped forward, looking like an untouchable goddess, meant to be worshipped by the masses with her beautiful and aloof appearance. Her every move attracted the attention of those around her. Jian Menger, 16, profound spiritual sea realm. She had already mastered the 18 first-class sword arts of the Sword Pavilion. Based on her current speed, she'll likely reach the Gold Core realm before she turns 20. A 20-year-old Gold Core realm expert? My God! Many disciples of Sword Marquee Mansion near the drill ground couldn't help sighing with emotion when they saw this extraordinary beauty. The realms were ranked as such: the 7 steps of the Spirit Path, transforming sea from spiritual power, and finally, Primordial Gold Core. The Primordial Gold Core realm was the strongest, and there was only one Gold Core realm expert in Sword Marquee Mansion. He was the mansion master, Jian Xinhong. And what did a person who became an expert of the Golden Core realm before the age of 20 represent? Blinding strength. She's such an exceptional genius that we can't even muster the slightest motivation to compete with her. She's a peerless genius that can only be seen once in a lifetime in Sword Marquee Mansion. No wonder she has hopes of becoming the new Sword Pavilion master at such a young age. No one can hold a candle to such an exceptional genius in the entire Bahui Commandery, never mind the Sword Marquee Mansion. Even those famous experts on the grandstand were staring at Jian Menger with gleaming eyes. Nearly all were here for her, except for Bai Chong and a few others. The eye-catching and aloof girl made a beeline for Jian Wushuang, who stood amid the crowd. She spoke without emotion. "Jian Wushuang, I heard you finally condensed your spiritual power and became a warrior. Congratulations." Turning his head, Jian Wushuang gave her a cold glance and said nothing. She wasn't angry. "You've become a warrior and even achieve a breakthrough into the 6th step of the Spirit Path in such a short time. That's admittedly terrific. But you can't hope to close the gap in our strength in just 2 months. I advise you not to challenge me today." "Don't challenge you?" he sneered. "This battle is unavoidable ever since you and your father started coveting the position of Sword Pavilion Master 2 months ago. Stubborn. But you've always been this way." She was still indifferent. "I know you bear resentment in your heart, but there's an unbridgeable gap between us. Why must you come and seek humiliation?" "Seek humiliation? You really do think very highly of yourself. Have it your way. You can't blame me later when you're the one not accepting my advice. I'll show you the full extent of my strength and snip that impossibly stupid idea you have in the bud," she said coolly. "I'll be looking forward to it." Jian Menger ended the conversation and stood casually in the center of the drill ground. Though she was surrounded by many young geniuses of the Sword Marquee Mansion, they might as well be invisible compared to her. She was like a crane standing among chickens, attracting attention with every move she made. For example, everyone had noticed the brief conversation between her and Jian Wushuang. Jian Menger is talking to Jian Wushuang. What is she saying? Earlier, they spoke in very quiet voices. Coupled with the noise in the drill ground, no one except the talented disciples close to them heard their conversation. They became very curious about it. "I heard that Jian Wushuang made a blood oath 2 months ago to battle it out with Jian Menger today." "I heard that too. This guy is really overreaching himself. How dare he challenge Jian Menger? Who among us young disciples of Sword Marquee Mansion has the right to challenge this god's chosen daughter? Jian Wushuang is just trash who condensed his spiritual power 2 months ago. How dare he?" "That's not exactly true. He may have condensed his spiritual power very late, but he spent only a month to break through the 6th step of the Spirit Path. His cultivating speed is unbelievable." "So what?" "He's merely at the 6th step of the Spirit Path. A month has passed since then. Are you suggesting he has broken through the 7th step of the Spirit Path or the spiritual sea realm and is on par with Jian Menger?" "What a joke." "That's true." All of them began looking down on him. On the drill ground, there was another person who was paying special attention to Jian Wushuang. It was Jian Lin. 1 month ago, Jian Wushuang defeated him, and badly at that. He had been harboring deep resentment since then, and today was his chance to avenge himself. He held his hands firmly together, repeating Jian Wushuang's name in his mind. The young disciples who had passed the 5th story of the trial tower gathered in the middle of the drill ground. Just as Jian Lan was getting ready to announce the start of the battle, 2 people showed up nearby. What? The famous experts on the grandstand noticed the newcomers immediately and instantly looked at them with sharp eyes. Even the languid Bai Chong couldn't help glancing at them. Primordial gold core. Not only that, the peak of the gold core realm. The famous experts were all awed. Those with primordial gold cores were definitely top-notch experts in the Bahui Commandery. Everyone with the right to sit in the grandstand had all achieved that level, but most had only reached the initial gold core realm, with Jian Xinhong being stronger than most. But although he had reached the profound gold core realm, he still had a long way to go before he would achieve the peak of the gold core realm. Among those present, there was only one who had the possibility of reaching the peak of the gold core realm. That was Bai Chong, and that was merely a possibility, not a certainty. He hardly ever fought with others, so no one knew about his true condition. Now, the leader of the 2 newcomers was evidently a peak gold core realm expert.
It's her.
Bai Chong was stunned, recognizing the newcomer.
Sir Bai Chong, you know her?
Jian Xinhong promptly asked.
Yes. Bai Chong nodded.
It's Xue Hanxin, the 9th elder of the Tianyuan sword sect. She reached the peak of the gold core realm 10 years ago. Tianyuan sword sect? And an elder at that. Everyone on the grandstand was shocked. They were all famous experts in the Bahui Commandery, with vast knowledge. They naturally knew about the Tianyuan sword sect. The Tianyuan sword sect was one of the 5 sects in the Tianyan province. It was said that there were quite a few experts in that sect who had reached the Yinyang Void realm, and there were even more experts in the Gold Core realm. In the entire Tianyan province, the sect was doubtlessly a strong influence and a true top sect. These experts in the Bahui Commandery, even the most powerful Sword Marquis Mansion, were nothing compared to the Tianyuan sword sect. After all, their commandery was only one out of the 108 commanderies in the Tianyan province. An elder of the sect, no matter their identity or strength, was enough to incite awe in these famous experts. They began wondering why an elder of the Tianyuan sword sect would come to Sword Marquis Mansion. Just then, Jian Lan, who was also on the grandstand, said proudly, "Don't worry everyone. Elder Xue is here especially for my daughter." The famous experts looked stunned. In the middle of the drill ground, Jian Menge, who had been drawing attention all along, was already walking toward the newcomers.